in public session. The minutes of the meeting of the 6th and 14th of February have been circulated. Are the minutes agreed? Agreed. Before we commence the main business, we've turned to correspondence. 2019-401 is proposed to note this item of correspondence and to forward it to Minister Ross, Department of Transport and Tourism. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2019-402A and B. It's proposed to note this item of correspondence. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2019-403. Proposed to note the concerns raised in this item of correspondence and forwarded to the Minister of State Responsibility for Sport, Minister Griffin, for his observations on the matter. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 219-404A and B. Proposed to consider this item as part of our committee's work programme. Is that agreed? Sorry, excuse me, just on that point, sorry, yes. The clerk has brought to my attention, the item here basically is the reappointment of Maurice O'Gorman for a 2-year period to the Harbour Board in Galway. He's already been before us in last April, so if you feel we need to bring him in again, we have no problem doing that, or we could either that or consent to he continue in office for the 2 years. So I'm in your hands entirely. I propose that we accept that he stays in office. Would that be agreed? It's correspondence 2019-404A and B. It's an email from Mary Daly from the Office of Minister Shane Ross, dated 11th of February, that the Minister has consented to the reappointment of Maurice O'Gorman for a 2-year period. He came in last April. And I think the cycle of the appointments was that it ended.
Appointed to which, Chairman? Sorry.
It's the Galway Harbour Authority. Galway Harbour Company. Sorry, the Galway Harbour Company. The correspondence is there. We just. It's 404A and B. Sorry, there's 404B. So there's no problem. We can bring him in again. It's just that we're bringing him in to ask him the same questions we asked him.
No, but he was only appointed.
I think that he was only appointed at the end of April. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So his first appointment was for a year. That was the term that was left.
So he came in obviously
this is an extension
towards the tail end of an original term,
yeah.
And he's been extended. Okay.
Yeah, but there's no problem. It's just it's a matter for the committee. So I'm in your hand. Pardon?
I think that we shouldn't bring him in again.
Because we've found
such a short time ago.
Yeah.
That I was just.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. No. Fine. Okay. So we'll agree that then.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've agreed that we won't ask him to appear before the committee. That's fine. Correspondence 2019-405A and B. It was considered at our meeting of the 14th of February, and we agreed to schedule this meeting. This is the Football Association of Ireland that we'd agreed to reschedule this meeting for the 10th of April. Senator O'Mahony, you wish.
Sorry, I just want to. I wasn't in attendance at the last meeting, but just in relation to the appearance of John Delaney, I note that the financial controller has resigned and will be leaving the FAI at the end of March. Now, I presume whatever discussion will come up would involve financial matters. So I just be concerned that that meeting won't be as thorough as it might need to be in that circumstances. I just raised that concern, that's
sure.
all.
So do you propose we try and reschedule before the end of March?
Well, who was due to come in the delegation?
Well, there's 4 named people in the correspondence. I'll just get it now. Sorry. They mentioned four staff members. There's a letter with 4 names. I saw the 4 names. Yeah, we can come back to you on that. Our clerk will get that for you. I think I can find it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting that there's anything untoward or anything else. But what I would feel though that if
He proposed to bring in 4 persons with him to the meeting. So what we can do is, if you wish, we'll go back to that when we get the information from the clerk. So we'll just leave it aside for the moment and we'll return to it later in the meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, correspondence 2019-406. This item was considered on the 14th of February and we're reissuing the invitation to the Minister to attend to discuss the issue in relation to rural transport, if that's agreed.
Just on that, I mean, unfortunately, due to pressure of work, he said he can't attend, but this is his job.
Of course,
He gave commitments
to
about rural transport, and he should be here to come out, you know, to answer questions and to be scrutinised by people. That's actually unreal. Due to pressure of work, this is his job. And he's made commitments, and he's transferring his responsibilities over to others. He should be here to answer questions, particularly when rural transport is on his knees.
Well, we agreed on the 14th of February to reissue it to him, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know, even the response, he's satisfied, however, that the session will be worthwhile as the NTA will be in attendance. He's the head book cat. That's unacceptable. It really is unacceptable. It's hard to credit that, you know, due to pressure of work. He's what?
Over the Department of Justice.
Well, now, and he can't be here to answer questions when rural transport is in crisis.
Well, just on a point of information, we agreed on the 14th of February to reissue the invitation to him and for him to make himself available at a date that would be agreed, isn't that it?
Yeah, but it's still unacceptable. We're having this meeting today.
I want to make the point that we've asked him to make himself available, and I think quite rightly the Minister should be here. Absolutely, he can't be here today, but we've asked for him to be here as soon as possible.
Yeah, but even the answer there, you know, he's satisfied, however. So in other words, he's literally quite happy to kick his responsibilities over to others.
Yeah, but the committee's made it clear in response to him that we want him to come in here at a date to be agreed. Like we've already decided that.
I know, but how long ago was that response sent to?
The 14th was the meeting. Sorry, it was agreed on the 14th that we would write to him.
So that's almost a fortnight ago, and we haven't got any confirmation back from him.
So the clerk tells you it's up for discussion today.
He's in no hurry, is he?
Well,
to address the issues.
Any other member wish to comment?
I thought it's unusual that previously when we sought the Minister to appear before the committee, he would say that there's a clash in the diary, but my diary is free.
Yes, on such and such a date.
I think this is the first time he hasn't indicated an alternative.
Okay.
And he didn't actually say there's a clash in the diary. He said due to work, his busy schedule.
Right.
So I would place a bet myself now. If you went up at 11, he'd be in the members having his 11s. Because he's deferred it to another organisation this morning. He hasn't offered an alternative, and that's out of sync in fairness, what he normally does. We've asked him in before on issues, and any issue he hasn't been able to come before, he has always, I think, offered an alternative.
Okay, well, what does... Yes, sorry.
Push through legislation that has us here today, and the problem, like, you know, that he created. You know, he put through legislation with no solution.
Well, I'm in your hands. We've, just for the recollection again, the minute on the 14th, we asked that we would reschedule it. The letter didn't issue yet. Because it was subject for discussion today. Oh, sorry, because we were debating the issue today. So we'll issue it again. Is that okay? And we'll ask the clerk to make contact with his private secretary and that to fix the date as soon as possible, and certainly within the next couple of weeks. Is that?
Is that invitation? I thought it was sent out on the 14th. It wasn't now, is it not?
Sorry, no, just the item was considered on the 14th of February, and the members agreed to reschedule this meeting for the 10th. Sorry, excuse me, apologies. The item was considered on the 14th of February, at which members agreed to reissue this invitation for another date to be confirmed, is what's in brackets here.
Right. So when was that issued to the Minister?
the letter hasn't issued
Oh,
because the correspondence is only being seen by the committee, the full committee today.
yeah, but surely if we'd agreed on the 14th,
To the 14th
yeah,
meeting.
we'd agreed on the, as
Can
a
I just go
committee.
in? Will I go into committee for a moment? What was the issue there? The last meeting on the 14th was not a select committee, was it, Paul? So I just go into, if we go into a private session for a minute. Resume public session, and the reason the correspondence is before us today is that our last committee meeting, we're not in public session. The clerk has explained that our last meeting was a private meeting and there was no public part of that meeting, and it's a decision of this committee that all correspondence must be dealt with in public. So this is the first time we've had the opportunity to discuss this formally as a committee. But I think that the consensus is that it will issue today, and that the clerk will make direct contact with his private secretary, and he'll tell us immediately the outcome of that. Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe
for a date.
If he could pass on the concerns of the committee, that he hasn't saw fit to make himself available on such a very important issue.
Sure.
You know, to say he's under pressure from work, but this is actually his job.
That's agreed then. So that's with there. Correspondence 2019-407. Proposed to note this correspondence because they're coming in this morning to us. Correspondence 2019-408. Proposed to arrange a visit to the Coast Guard Marine Rescue Coordination Centre as soon as possible. Now we're trying to do that. Yes, go ahead.
I just come in on that here. Look, just in relation to the ongoing very serious issues
Sure.
with the Coast Guard, and I think we've all received correspondence outlining their grave concerns, in particular in relation to the directive issued on the the blue lights and sirens and how it would impede their ability to respond to an emergency. I think that we should invite not just the Coast Guard itself, but the staff and volunteers, and in that, when I talk about volunteers, I include the volunteers that have raised a series of grave concerns that they have with this latest directive. So I would propose that we have them in for committee meeting.
Fine. That's fine. Is that agreed? That's agreed. So we'll ask the clerk to arrange that. 2019-409, proposed to note this correspondence. Is that agreed? Agreed. 2019-410A and B, proposed to note this correspondence. Is that agreed? Agreed. 2019-411, proposed to note this correspondence and to forward it to the NTA for comment. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2019-412A and B, proposed to note this correspondence. That is the issue that arose there earlier, Senator Mahoney, in relation to the Football Association in Ireland. We have the names of the people, if we can take that other issue. Ray Walsh proposed that John Delaney, CEO, Fran Gavin, Director of Competitions, Ray Walsh, Corporate Affairs and Licensing Director, Karen Campion, Director of Business Partnerships and Strategy, and Ruth Doctor, High Performance Director. They were the people that he proposed to bring to our meeting on the 10th of April. So you raised the point there about the Financial Director as well.
That obviously the whole idea of it, I think it was Deputy Murphy that suggested it initially, was in connection with corporate governance.
Sure.
Surely corporate governance would
would
include Financial Director.
So if we were to say then that if would you suggest that we get a date in March then? Would that be?
Well, I'm just pointing out the issue, and as I said,
yeah, sorry, John.
I'm just pointing out the issue. If,
yeah,
like strategy, all the rest of it is a thing, but it's about corporate governance. I understand that Deputy Murphy isn't here. Perhaps she'd have a view on that.
Well, there's two things we can do. We can ask them if the person concerned is no longer employed by the organisation. If that is the case, I don't know what the case is, but if you wish to have that included specifically, but it is about corporate governance. That's what the meeting is about, from our perspective. The Chief Executive Officer, I believe, the clerk advised me, is the person who's accountable for that issue before us.
Fair enough, but it's just that
it's a very important issue.
Yeah.
So,
especially in the fact that the meeting, I think, am I correct in saying that the meeting has been postponed twice?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. So, well, the 10th of April is the date we have. Do you wish that we might try an earlier date if possible? But it's probably unlikely, but that's the date.
Well, I mean, you've agreed to that.
Yeah.
At this stage. So.
Okay. Well, I think it's an important point that you raise.
I'm prepared. I mean, as I said, I'm not making any allegations, but I just felt in the context of the invitation that was
fine. Okay. So we note that correspondence. Is that agreed? The next one is 2019-413. Proposed to note that a correspondence. Is that agreed? Pardon. Go ahead.
What's that about, Chair?
It's an email received from Padraig Kelly, Office of the Minister for Mental Health and Older People, on behalf of Jim Daly, TD, dated the 18th of February, regarding the upcoming Joint Committee on Rural Taxes, thanking us for his invitation to appear, and that he's got other commitments, and he's suggested another witness to appear, who are actually here today.
Okay.
Okay. Correspondence 2019-414AB. Proposed to note this item of correspondence. Is not agreed. Agreed. Correspondence 2019-415. Proposed to note this correspondence. That's about their people are appearing here today. Correspondence 2019-416. It's Deputy Rock isn't here at the moment, but basically he expressed concerns about the Metro project and that we should have a discussion with the NTA on that. And I know myself that it is a matter of he was raising it all as well. So I think it would be in order if we would arrange with through the clerk to get the NTA here to talk about Bus Connect and Metro, if that's agreed by the committee as soon as we can. If that's agreed. Correspondence 2019-417 A and B is proposed to note this correspondence. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2019-418. This is an email from Deputy Eamon Ryan about the same issue. It's proposed to consider this item as part of our work programme, which is what we've just decided there anyway. So we can inform him that we will invite him in shortly. EU scrutiny. Turning to matters of EU scrutiny, to record in public the decisions which the committee agreed last week. COM 2018-893 proposed that there are no subsidiarity concerns with this proposal. It is further proposed that this proposal does not warrant further scrutiny. Is that agreed? Agreed. COM 2018-894 proposed that there are no subsidiarity concerns with this proposal. It is further proposed that this proposal does not warrant further scrutiny. Is that agreed? Agreed. COM 2018-895 proposed that there are no subsidiarity concerns with this proposal. It is further proposed that this proposal does not warrant further scrutiny. Is that agreed? Agreed. Is there any other business?
Correspondence there in regard to is it 409, a Cox student, Sam McCormick, looking for a bit of help from us. What do we propose to do with that, Chair? I know we noted it, but what do we propose to do?
What we agreed was to note it. He's talking about the Cork service.
Could we move more than that, like, Chair? Could we?
What's the matter for you to propose there? There's no
I propose that we refer to the NTA for a response.
Oh yes, of course, yeah. No, that's
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll amend 219, 409, that we also refer to it to the NTA.
For response. Thanks, Chair.
Pardon. Any other business? Okay, so we'll adjourn for... pardon?
Yeah, suspend.
We'll suspend just for a couple of minutes, bringing our witnesses. Yeah. Now, the first session of today's meeting will consider rural taxis. In this regard, I would like to welcome the following witnesses: Miles O'Reilly, General Secretary of TD Ora; Vinnie Kearns, Chief Executive, Expert Taxis Limited Dublin; Derek Callan, Managing Director, Satellite Taxis Cork; Eric O'Brien, Chief Executive, Rapid Cabs Waterford; and Gerard Mackin, Taxi Alliance Ireland; and Jim Waldron, National Private Hire Taxi Association. You're all very welcome. And before we commence, I just have to read this. It's a standard thing I have to read. And for the purpose of officials attending, in accordance with procedures, I'm required to read the following. By virtue of Section 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charge against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I will now invite Mr Miles O'Reilly, General Secretary, TD to make his opening presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Excuse me. I wish to thank you indeed for the opportunity to make a statement to the committee. I'm speaking on behalf of Tudora, and we represent taxi companies with members in Carlow, Cork, Dublin, Galway, Limerick and Waterford. We are aware of the complaints of a lack of public transport services in rural areas. We present proposals for a service that can be offered within the framework of the Taxi Regulation Act 2013. The Act and its regulations already provide for local area hackneys, but after 5 years there are only 13 of these nationally, and also the Act provides for a community transport service operated by volunteers, which understandably has also not provided a solution for rural areas. The key features of our proposals are that the service would operate only from the area surrounding a village to the village and then back home, a maximum distance each way of, for example, 15 kilometres. The area surrounding the village would be defined by regulation as being a maximum, for example, of 1,000 persons. Applicants to become village transport drivers would be examined only on the regulations in relation to that service, thus facilitating ease of driver entry. The return journey from the village would be subsidised. Passengers would be required to share the journey with others, as do bus passengers. The vehicles, unlike hackneys, would have a roof sign with the name of the village followed by the word transport. The vehicle would be capable of carrying 7 or 8 passengers. In common with other small public service vehicles, such as taxis and taxis, the drivers would be vetted and licensed by the Gardaí and would be self-employed. The vehicles would be subject to the NTA rules on age and suitability, NCT tests, and be wheelchair accessible. Now, as we see it, the beneficiaries of the village transport service will be those who wish to visit or shop in their village, including the elderly who may no longer be able to drive, persons with reduced mobility, persons with low incomes who do not own a car, and those who want to drink alcohol and wish to comply with the drink driving laws and who need transport to get from their home to and from their village. Village services, including small shops and pubs, would therefore also benefit from the service. Now, a subsidy will be required to make it attractive for drivers to offer the service and for passengers to use the service. Without a subsidy, there will be insufficient passengers to make the service viable. Almost all other passenger transport is subsidised. The level of subsidy needed per journey could be determined by a consultancy study. The service could use licensed publicans or others to supply subsidy vouchers to persons living outside the village to return to their homes. With the involvement of self-employed drivers and village publicans, the booking of the journeys can be done informally. An app that could accept bookings could have a role to play, but the nature of the service would not make an app essential, as we are aware that some of those for whom the service is intended would not use smartphones. Passengers would, of course, not be required to drink or eat in a pub or purchase other goods or services in the village to benefit from the service. Now, Tudora is an associate member of the IRU, the International Road Transport Union, and participates in the work of the IRU Taxi Group. We are aware through our membership of the IRU of the European Union High Reach programme to provide innovative mobility solutions to cope with transport poverty throughout Europe. Solutions are being actively explored in areas of Luxembourg, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Greece and Romania. And there's a high-reach workshop in Brussels in 1 month's time, on 27th to 28th of March, to consider the results of the work that's been done so far. We believe that our proposals being made to you today are also innovative and that they can provide a solution to the transport poverty being experienced in Irish rural areas. Our proposals provide for a local, informal, adaptable service that would serve the people throughout the country who wish to get to and from their local village. We commend our proposals to the committee.
Thank you, Morris. I'll ask Jim Waldron to make his opening statement as well, please.
Morning, Chairman. Thanks for inviting me to attend the committee meeting. I represent the National Private Hire and Taxi Association, the biggest representative group in Ireland representing taxi drivers. We evolved from the Private Hire Association prior to the landmark case, Humphrey versus Minister of Environment and Dundalk Urban Council and Dublin Corporation, when our President Christopher Humphrey took on the government, won the case on behalf of our members. Virtually overnight, the number of taxis grew by about 500%. We agree that the rural communities of Ireland need support and an imaginative ideas to help them, including the broadband, health, crime prevention and particularly transport services. But we suggest the answer is not an Uber-style transport service. This would be detrimental and dangerous to both rural communities as well as taxi drivers. What does Uber-style mean? It seems to us it stands for no rules, no standards, no responsibility. To operate as an SPS driver, we presently have standards. 1, you must have an SPSV licence. 2, you must have an SPSV licensed vehicle. It's as simple as that. And to meet those requirements, you have to pass an area knowledge test and be deemed fit and proper, be deemed fit and proper person and hold an SPSV licence by An Garda Síochána. You have to have adequate insurance. Now we've vested interest groups suggesting we dumb down the taxi industry and allow anyone drive for hire to benefit their interests. If they're allowed to do so, what do you expect will happen? We predict people come from the pub will be met by people who are deemed unsuitable by An Garda Síochána, cars that are not suitable or roadworthy, and situations, for example, like a babysitter taking children out of a bed, taking them along for the ride to get an extra few euros. To allow Uber style, you will invite drivers who are so desperate they will break any rules to profit, and this is already supported and reported happening worldwide. We read almost daily about confrontation, assaults, rapes and even murders by so-called Uber drivers or what we would class as unregulated taxi services. And this is the answer to bringing people home to the pub. Our understanding of rural Ireland is one of communities and neighbourly compassion. It's when people help each other, and hopefully they will continue to do so. If Mr and Mrs Murphy want to visit the local surgery and the health service, and the HSE won't provide the transport service, neighbours will, and they do so at the moment. There will never be a taxi for everyone in the audience, or an ambulance, or a post office, or a guard, a bus or a train, whether it be in rural life or city life. Allow Uber style into any part of Ireland and it will grow and destroy the livelihood of the 21,000 taxi families, both urban and rural, relying on the industry to make a living. We are the men and the women who drive you to and from the shops, the college, offices, hospitals, workplaces, concerts, sports events. We are the people who work on sociable hours to bring you home from the pub. We are the people who face the front line of antisocial behaviours, dealing with people who are drunk or on drugs. We are the people who provide a safe, professional public transport service. We are the families relying on our business to survive. We know your decisions will affect us, and we will remember decisions and recommendations made by this committee. You could be responsible for destroying our livelihoods if you downgrade our standards. Please don't.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member would like to? Yes, sorry, Jared. If you'd like to read your opening statement, and if Harry Cordero have, if they wish, you can make an opening statement as well. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
My name is Jared Mackin. Good morning, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jared Mackin, Chairperson of the Taxi Alliance of Ireland, and also a member of the National Transport Authority's Taxi Advisory Committee. In my position, I represent urban and rural taxis and small public service vehicles licence holders from 26 counties of Ireland. We are all aware of the issues around rural communities and the feeling of isolation. These are a topic regularly discussed at the Taxi Advisory Committee meetings. In fact, I recently arranged a meeting with several rural taxi licence holders with the NTA and Rural Link bus services around these issues. At the meeting, we discussed a subsidy for rural taxi drivers and the possibility of incorporating rural taxis and hackneys into the Rural Link service. This also would facilitate smaller groups of isolated people in areas when there is no need for a 14 or 18-seater bus. It is currently a prerequisite join the Rural Link services that you must have a 14-seater bus. This immediately limits the number of applicants joining the system and making it unviable for journeys which is less than 14 people. We therefore have recommended that this condition be changed and hackneys and taxis become eligible to join the NTA and Rural Link services are in agreement with us on this fact. The application process for rural hackneys, this process somewhat cumbersome as there is numerous steps in the process which would deter applicants from considering applying. We have suggested to the NTA that these applicant process be reviewed and they have agreed to look into the process. We would support these changes to the rural hackney process, especially if managed by the NTA, as this would be the expert in rolling out this initiative such as these, and would ensure public safety is paramount and enforcement rule is element and to eliminate illegal operators that are currently operating across the rural communities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. There's no further opening statement then, so we'll just proceed as normal. Just to explain to everybody present, the normal process is that we deal with members of the committee first before we move to people who are not members of the committee, and in the order of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, Independent and others. That's just a rotation so everybody knows where they are, and there's no bar on anybody asking questions or making comments. So Senator Feehan.
I had to attend a photograph, so I want to read what they've said, so maybe I'll let some other members start first.
Of course. That's Deputy Troy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, and welcome to our guests here this morning, and thank them for the time and effort they've put into making the submissions. I suppose the one positive thing that has emanated over the last number of months with proposals and suggestions of new measures to be introduced is that for the first time in a long time we have rural transport fairly high in the political agenda, and there's an acknowledgement now by government and indeed by most stakeholders that something needs to be done because currently it's not fit for purpose. I'd be interested to know that of any of our 6 gentlemen that are in front of us today, and are any one of you hold one of these 13 hackney licences? No. I think the fact that there's only 13 clearly demonstrates that it's not fit for purpose. I suppose I'd be interested also to hear from your own experience in terms of, I would imagine your main overhead is your cost of insurance, and in terms of what is the average cost of insurance that you're paying annually, and how has that increased over the last number of years, or has it decreased? I would imagine that it's increased. I'd also, I suppose, be interested to hear one of the things that has repeatedly been said in terms of Uber is that nearly every Uber driver, if you were to listen to some people, is a rogue driver. I suppose what Uber has done is to have used technology to connect people who are willing to provide a service with somebody who needs that service. And what we're trying to do is, well, certainly I can only speak for myself, is how can we look at the advancements in technology to provide or connect somebody who's willing to provide a service with somebody who's in need of that service. And what some of the suggestions you've made here this morning can do that. But the bottom line is there's many parts of rural Ireland in particular that has no transport whatsoever. The local link that was set up in reply to the changes in the drink driving legislation on a pilot basis has provided a certain element of a service. But given how rural Ireland is settled and populated, it's not able to provide the flexibility that's needed to go up side roads and by roads. So we do need to look at how we can establish a flexible public transport service for rural Ireland. And I'm conscious what people are saying. We cannot dumb down the service. We can't sacrifice standards. We need to ensure that anybody who provides this service from a driving perspective is of good character, Garda vetted. The car that they're using or the vehicle that they're using meets the minimum required standards. And it's how do we mirror and match all that and ensure that we get a service that's fit for purpose. I'd be interested to hear in terms of your views on the subsidy and how would that subsidy work, because quite clearly the reason why taxis aren't operating in these villages is there's no money to be made in them. If there was, I would imagine you or your members would be operating in them. So I'd be interested to hear how you envisage the subsidy working. So just to recap on a couple of questions that I have, none of you hold one of those elusive 13 Hackney licences. Are any representative of those 13 people? Have any there that are before us this morning spoken with those 13 peoples? What is your main overhead, and how do you feel the subvention or subsidy could be paid?
Can I just before you come in there, what we normally do is I'll take the comments from everybody, and then we can go back, and then you can go over and back on all the issues. I think Sinn Féin then, Deputy Munster.
Sharing time with my
That's
colleague.
fine. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, similar to what other members have said there. Firstly, we all recognise that rural transport is on its knees, and it's a part that's been neglected for decades, and people are finding it increasingly difficult to get from A to B within their community, and with the lack of investment in our public transport system, as in bus airing services, has left it even more problematic. But just questions was Mr. O'Reilly there, just in relation to some of yours. I mean, we accept too, because the real worry is out there about sacrificing standards, and you're weighing that with the real need to look at other mechanisms to provide transport for people that are basically stranded. I think it's fair to say in parts of rural areas. But just those questions I had about what you're suggesting yourself. Are you talking about, it's just for information, just trying to get, were you talking about one licence per town and per village, or, you know, Deputy Troy alluded to it too, about the fact that taxis, because of the very rural nature of a village, it's not financially viable for taxis. Like if you're in some sort of even a modest-sized town, and you've people coming from pubs and clubs, well, you're going to do the local runs rather than go out into, you know, down by roads and boreens and, you know, lose your way on the way back or whatever type of thing. But are you saying, how would this be financially viable for yourselves, given that you're talking about providing a 7 or 8-seater and wheelchair accessible as well, you know, and will your drivers have to invest in new vehicles to provide that service. And you talked about the grant or the subsidy. What exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about, you know, what sort of costings do you reckon if something is, which I think you pretty much accept, is unlikely to be financially viable, given that, you know, if it was, then others taxi services would be using it. So in relation to the grant or subsidy, what do you think would be required to make it? You obviously have to have some idea in your head. So if you could elaborate on what you see as the grant or subsidy to make it financially viable. And just in relation to ring fencing the areas, how would you propose to monitor that? Who would, you know, when you say about the kilometres from one village to another, who would regulate that? Who would oversee that? Who would, you know, how would that work? But let's see, there was one other one, I think. Yeah, no, but I think, I suppose the real concern here too is in relation, well, it's accepting that, well, of course we have to look at alternative things. You know, people need to, when you get into a taxi, as it is, you feel safe, because you know there's regulation there, there's standards there, there's, you know, and they've paid so much, in the very fact that their insurance goes up by thousands once you've so you have that security of that. So how could your service that you're proposing offer people that same security if the, you know, the way it's set up as you propose?
Okay, sorry. So I just want to get all the questions first, if you don't mind. It just means that, and I know that some people may be asking, and you have every right to ask every question, want the same question twice, but if we can ask new questions as well. Sorry, Senator Conway, and then Deputy Collins.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Coming from a place, obviously, like Belmullet, which with no transport. I mean, we talk about transport as if, you know, it's become a problem recently. But right across the life cycle, it's been a problem in rural Ireland for many years. So I'm glad to have this discussion around it, but there are a few issues that are coming forward for me, and one is the issue of displacement of the existing taxi drivers within the areas, and we don't want to be in a situation where other people are going to be put out of business, if you like, people who have served the communities for many years and sometimes for a couple of different generations. Now, the other thing is around the 15 kilometres limit. So, for instance, you're probably not familiar with the Belmullet Peninsula, but if you wanted to go from Blacksod into Belmullet town, it would be far more than 15 kilometres. So, how does it work in that sense, if it's just with the 15 kilometres? They're my two main questions, obviously the cost of insurance as well. And just in terms of this being, you say it's operating in 13 other places, so has it been piloted and reviewed and analysed in the way to analyse the effectiveness of it? And of course, while this would serve to address some of the problems, it doesn't address the problems like the trips to the hospital. That's one of the main things that problems we have in rural Ireland, is particularly for people who are living alone and they don't have transport to the hospital, and then the lack of connectivity as well between buses and trains and all of this. So it poses big problems. But I mean, we're here to discuss any solution, and I'm glad to discuss it from that point of view.
Deputy Collins.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to those who made their presentations this morning. I've been very, I'd say, interested in this side of rural transport for quite some time, and especially with the road traffic bill that came before the Dáil. And Deputy Troy said one thing correct, that it's a very positive thing that we're now talking about rural transport. The mistake was, before this bill became before the Dáil, we should have been talking about this then. So not to be firefighting all the time, but Ross never understood what we explained from day one to him from the floor of the Dáil, that this was going to cause a crisis in rural Ireland, where there was serious problems already. But unfortunately, he did throw a little sprinkle of money at local link and to the COD, and unfortunately, again, we unravelled that in it all, and then he threw more money. But again, it wasn't enough to touch the issue. The issue was that you are going to create a crisis in rural communities for people to go and come. Genuinely, most people, and it is the pub. There's no point in us, I know there's a shop and there's a number of other places people want to go, but genuinely, this is the issue that hit the headlines, was the rural people wanted to go for a drink and come safely for a drink, and which they had done all their lives, and unfortunately, all of a sudden, they became criminals. I actually have serious issues with the Uber-style transport service that's been thought about at the moment. And I give credit where credit is due, but my colleague in West Cork, I think, has come up with this idea, and you're a minister there. He was the same minister telling me, or putting on the papers, that I was scaremongering. There was no problem. Now he's running around frantically trying to come up with a solution to the problem. But like that, he was like Ross and the rest. They were all jumping to support Ross's bill, but unfortunately it was a mistake. My problems, my issues are, and I talk to a lot of taxi operators, and they have very serious concerns, and I actually would agree with their concerns. First of all, they have to replace, and maybe I can stand to be corrected, their vehicle every 10 years. Which is very stringent rules. Then most taxi operators want to take on staff, but for them to obtain a licence, they have to go through an extremely rigorous test or whatever, which most people are. They're asked silly questions that are totally irrelevant to what they have to do. I think we need to look at, to give them taxi operators the freedom to take on more staff. You have to look at somebody maybe that has a 16-seater bus licence. Surely be to God, if he's got a licence to drive a 16-seater bus, he can drive a taxi automatically, which could resolve a lot of problems. At the moment, he's not allowed to do that, but could resolve a lot of problems going forward, and could create an opening for taxi operators to employ people. That's what they're telling me in West Cork, and I have to listen to the people that are on the ground, not to create another system that could actually explode further problems going forward. And that's what we've been doing in this issue the whole time. We haven't been resolving anything. We've been creating more problems. So we bring in a new system and we start putting taxi operators out of business. They'll say that people can argue that point to me, saying there's not enough of them there. But they're saying, come up, if you get a licence to drive a 16-seater bus, that's good enough to drive a taxi. So straight away you'll have a whole load of new drivers on the road that'll drive the taxis that are already in existence, to have all the rules, to have all the regulations. They're bent over backwards, rules, regulations, costing them a fortune, an absolute fortune. And you're coming in with a system that I can't understand, because the way I see it, if Johnny's sitting by the fireside at home, and Paddy down the road, maybe 6 or 7 miles away, wants to spin to go to the post office. We won't always say the pub, but it could be the pub. And he's going to leave his fireplace. He's going to take Paddy to the shop, to the town. He's going to go home, leave him there maybe for an hour or two, and come back and collect him again, presumably at a five or a whip or something like that. How is he going to do that? He's going to have to be guarded with it. I presume he's going to have some special type of insurance. Will the ordinary car insurance do? Is this a once-off grant he'll get? So that we've started the issue now for this year, but actually in 3 or 4 years' time, you're going to find that Johnny is at home. He's not going to get off the chair anymore, because it doesn't pay him to do that. So the Uber might work in a city-style setup, and it has worked out in the States, because I've spoken to people. These places are massively highly populated. They're on about apps and stuff, but 90% of the people we're talking about, it's just the house phone or the ordinary small mobile phone. They have apps don't come into play. But it might work, as I say, in a city-style environment. They're going to have a special 7-seater type vehicle, as you said, wheelchair accessible type vehicle. Am I right? It's not going to work in rural Ireland, And let's be honest. What we have in existence between taxi and hackney operators is there. They're paying through the nose. Maybe it is these people he should be looking at giving a contribution towards, to see how they can at least survive, take on a new driver, open up their operations far more than what they're able to do at this present time, and then we might have some opportunity to see a way forward. But for now, I think that this Uber-style thing that's been touted about is just a sop to people in rural Ireland to see what they call them. But you won't call the people in rural Ireland because they're fairly cute, and they know what will work and they know what won't work. And this is not going to work, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll just make a few comments and then we'll go to the answers to the questions and then over and back between the members. I think there's two things. I'd like to say that you're very welcome. You have a vast wealth of experience collectively right around the country. You provide a very important public service and absolutely acknowledge that. And in the absence of the critical mass, the commercial mass in rural, disparate rural areas, that there isn't a service that needs to be there for the individual. And I think that's what we're addressing here today. I think there's 2 points I'd like to make, that there is significant funding for the rural transport. It's gone from 10 million in 2015 to 14.3 million in 2018, and notwithstanding the criticisms of it, they carry over 1.9 million passengers, of whom almost 1 million of those were actually free travel passengers, and over 200,000 of the passengers they carry have require assistance or probably have some significant disability or need help. There's over 11.8 million kilometres travelled by the buses we're talking about. So, and there's over 900 drivers, 400 private operators. And I think the core of what you're saying, I think, Miles, what you're saying there is that we need to support a person who wishes to provide a service, but to meet a significant portion of that cost, where the population base is under 1,000 and the distance is not further, and acknowledging the point about Mayo, than the 15 kilometres. And Jared, I think the point that you made I find very interesting is the point you made about the connectivity between the rural link and the taxis and the hackneys. I think that's hugely important, because if you've joined up thinking at end of the delivery basis and you have access with your taxis, that makes that you are actually part of the service. So I think there's a lot of constructive points here. So if I start with you, Miles. Sorry, pardon. Oh, sorry, Frankie's back. Sorry about that.
My apologies. When you're in a minority government, you have to cover lots of other committees. So, look, I think in this room you have the solution to a problem, but there is a problem in rural Ireland. And when I was growing up back in the 80s, there was, I think, 2 or 3 hackney drivers in the town, and you only used them coming from the station, the railway station, and after that they were never used. People probably drank and drove and things like that. There was less cars. And then coming into the 90s, we all got into using taxis, and I know a lot of people, or hackneys or whatever, made a very, very good living. And people didn't mind paying that. I know people from Boyle would go to Carrick-on-Shannon, you get a bus back and forward. But in the last few years, first of all, you can't seem to get a taxi. A lot of those guys that were making good living have either retired and there's nobody taking over. And I'm saying this from smaller towns of 2,500, 1,500. They're just not there. And I went to another town 2 weeks ago to a party, and I would have a drink. And I didn't want to order a taxi. And why did I want to order a taxi? Because I knew I'd be taking that taxi driver for the one route for 20, he'd be away on a Saturday night for an hour. And you'd be leaving, he could make a lot more money. So I was conscious, because there's not enough people covering there. So we have a problem. And we have a problem for the few now that are going to the pubs, at night. And I think, you summed it up right. The Rural Transport Initiative is filling in the gaps, and it's welcome, but it's filling in the gaps for people. And I know a lot of people are using it to go shopping and go to visit hospitals and that, and it has the rural transport angle to it, where there was never a bus from various towns, and now you have various. So people are beginning to use it, and they're beginning to use it online. But I really think with the Deputy Troy outlined it. I was in London. I used the Uber share. I really think it is the solution to that problem in rural areas. And we can talk all we want, we can put whatever funding into it. It is a problem, and we can. And I understand, Jim. You know, you have interests, and you're right to protect those interests. And if I was in, I would. But there is an issue that we cannot get taxis in road. So the Uber share, as I use it in London, I was absolutely fascinated by it. Somebody from Boyle could be going to Roscommon, driving Roscommon. I could be drinking in the 4 provinces. On that app, I could get somebody to share that taxi with me to Tulsk, and then from Tulsk to Roscommon. I think it's a no-brainer for rural Ireland, but we have to ensure that the existing taxis and Hackney licence aren't inconvenienced too much. But at the moment, whatever has happened the last few years, maybe there's easier money somewhere. It's a tough job to be out driving at 3, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. There's easier things to do, but there is an issue in rural Ireland regarding taxis. Just one thing, Brendan Griffin, and I know I've had 2 publicans has been on to me. You know, they've seen Minister Griffin's rural transport initiative, of where they had a car which donated by and it's donated by community donations and contributions, and he believes it complements a lot of the issues. And it's a pilot scheme, but we need to look at all these initiatives outside the box. But I just think that there's something that's we need to look at something different, if that's okay. I haven't asked any questions, but it is a huge issue.
Okay, thank you, Senator Miles. You have the floor.
Well, just Mr. Chairman, the question of insurance, I'll ask my colleague Vinnie Cairns to deal with that shortly. Just going to some of the points made by Deputy Troy, he made the point that we can't dumb down, that we can't have a relaxation of standards, and obviously we completely agree with that. He asked also a question of how the subsidy would work. Well, obviously that's a very important point, and what we envisage is that the subsidy would be per journey, so you wouldn't pay a lump sum to the driver either for the vehicle or for insurance or anything like that, but you would subsidise each journey. So the incentive would be for the driver to complete the journey and get paid the subsidy for that journey. Now, what we envisaged was it would be the journey home, that the driver would get a voucher, and from either a publican or somebody else in the village, and the driver would then, at the end of a week or end of a month, present those vouchers to the Department of Social Protection or the local authority and get paid for the journeys that he's travelled. Now, the level of subsidy would be whatever is required to make it worthwhile for the driver to offer that service, because and that will vary maybe from one area to another, but the passenger will only pay a certain amount to get into and out of the village, and if there aren't enough passengers, obviously the service won't operate. So, and also the point about the amount of subsidy, I would make the point that to solve the problem of rural isolation, and to deal and to facilitate people getting into and out of the villages, I would say is whatever subsidy it takes is needed to solve that problem. So we certainly envisage that any user of the service would pay probably for the drive into the village, but the return home would be largely met by a subsidy voucher. Just going on to the questions raised by Deputy Munster, as we would see it, she asked a number of questions about who would regulate this. This would be part of the National Transport Authority regulations. For example, at present, under the Taxi Regulation Act, there are, as well as taxis, there are hackneys, there are local area hackneys, there are limousines. So this would be a new additional class of service, village transport service, in addition to those. Now, we've pointed out that the local area hackneys hasn't been successful because it's too restrictive in many ways, and perhaps what we're proposing would replace that service. Okay. But would be quite different than the proposals or than the way the local area hackneys operates. In relation to the local link service, we would see this as complementary to it. Local link its main purpose, as it seems, is to connect villages to other villages, connect villages, people living in villages, to national transport links, trains and buses and so on. What our objective here is simply to get people from the areas surrounding the village into the village and back home. So these vehicles and drivers would be quite different from ordinary hackneys who can travel anywhere in Ireland. They'd be quite different from taxis that can do a whole lot of things that our proposal for village transport could not do. It was rightly pointed out that the regulations in relation to, that apply to a driver becoming a taxi driver or a hackney driver, the exams are very, very difficult to pass. And although there have been some changes in the last year or so, they're still very difficult to pass. Now, if the driver's only role is within the kind of village and surrounding areas, the type of exams that needed for that would be quite different. They don't need to know the area of the whole county. They don't need to know about taxis, for example. All they need to know is about their own area. So it'd be much easier to recruit drivers than it is at present. On the question of the vehicles, undoubtedly there is an argument perhaps for a smaller vehicle than we've suggested, or an 8 or 9-seater vehicle. But if it's to provide a proper transport service, and particularly to get people out of pubs to their homes in the evening, you need capacity there to do that. And so we believe that the proposal for an 8 or 9-seater vehicle is the correct one, but I can understand there would be arguments against that. Now, what we're not seeking in any way to offer an Uber-type service. This would be regulated by the National Transport Authority, would be enforceable by the NTA and also by the Gardaí, and so it wouldn't be a question of somebody driving their private car who would be unregulated or anything of that kind. However, it would have a restricted role, but a very important role to get people from their homes in rural areas into the village and back out of the village. The people going from one village to another could be dealt with by local link. So we don't see that this would displace taxi drivers. As has been pointed out, there is a shortage of taxi drivers right throughout the country because over a number of years the exams to become a driver were much too difficult, and the cost of operating a taxi in a rural area, it just isn't economical. And it isn't economical for a lot of hackneys also to operate. So this is where a subsidy is required, and as I've outlined how the subsidy could work. The question of the 15 kilometres, that's an example. It could be, and obviously the point made about Belmullet, I take fully. And so whatever would be the hinterland of the village or the small town would be the area. And similarly, the question of 1,000 persons, again, that will vary depending on the area. And again, that's simply given as an example. So the question of trips to hospital, how that could be accommodated would be the persons taken by this village transport service to the village and then picked up by the local link service and brought to the hospital. the Uber-type service, for all kinds of reasons, not only the question of lack of regulation, it wouldn't provide a solution, we believe, and it operates successfully in urban areas. It would not be able to deal with the situation in rural areas. Now, I think probably I've answered most of those questions. I don't know if there's any other.
Get a few more of the questions answered that we've had already.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, just to come in on a few of the items there. First of all, I live in rural Ireland. I live in a village called Ballinellard in County Wexford, 25 kilometres from Wexford town. I'm 3.3 kilometres from my local village. We have a service there. It's very limited and it really only operates on the weekends. It's provided by 12, 14, 16-seater buses, and the only way it's viable is with capacity, as Miles stated earlier. The real issue is trying to get people from the local pubs home on the Friday and Saturday night, and that is reasonably well serviced because there's not a huge population in my local town. But to take insurance for the main issue at the moment, for a new entrant, say a person 50 years of age who may have driven a private car for 30 years, accident-free, full no claims bonus, they pass a PSV test to become a taxi driver. The minimum charge with the main insurers now at the moment for a new driver coming in starting off is €6,600. If, however, that driver was unfortunate and had an accident, he or she may have to get 3 letters of refusal to force an underwriter to give a quote. I've seen those quotes go as high as €16,000 and €17,000. So somewhere in between. The likes of a driver who's driving a taxi in Dublin for 20 years and no claims, the cheapest that insurance would be at the moment is somewhere around €1,800–1,900. So it is a substantial cost. Now, looking at the issue here, and it is a very complex issue, I think we're getting closer and closer to a solution. I don't think that our proposal is going to solve everything, but we should be looking at establishing a working group and looking at best practice in other jurisdictions throughout Europe. And let's not invent the wheel here in Ireland. But there are solutions there. There are integrated transport services where you use public and private transport to facilitate this service. On the viability and the subsidies, I think Miles covered the subsidies well. The service will not operate if it's not viable. In the current economy, with nearly full employment, people are exiting the taxi business, not entering the taxi business. You know, so the average age of a taxi driver at the moment is in the high 50s, which is not good for any workforce. So we definitely would welcome new entrants into the business, new blood into the business, so that we can increase our fleet sizes and provide higher service levels within the companies. And that's across all taxi, hackney and chauffeur operators the length and breadth of the country. Now, the costs, the average costs in my area to get home would be €5. None of the locals will pay anything more than €5. If that was a taxi journey, it would be approximately €14 or €15. So it needs to be subsidised to make it attractive to the user, so that they will pay maybe a €5 in and €5 then to get home. Otherwise, it will not be utilised. The monitoring, I think the NTA have a good enforcement team, and the Gardaí have specialised units within the Guards that are very well versed on PSV regulations. So I think there's adequate resources there to deal with that. Dealing with areas such as Belmullet, that radius could be extended out for areas that need greater. Michael, you raised something which is very true about the whole recruitment and retention of existing drivers. It is a big challenge for us, so we have to be very careful of the level of displacement that could be created by this. I think the type of service we're proposing here, it's restrictive in that it's addressing a specific need, which is the local area to the local village and back. It's not there for transporting people to a hospital appointment, wait around 2 hours and bring them home, because if that was the type of service, then it would deprive the rest of the people of the village of a service. So I think that covers most of the questions.
Anybody wish to respond to any? And I'll bring in Deputy O'Keefe. Sorry, apologies. Yes, sorry.
Just one point: the question of safety of the passengers, because this would be a regulated service coming under the National Transport Authority, and the drivers would all be vetted. It would be the same. You would feel as safe in one of these vehicles as you would in a taxi.
Okay, so I take it, Jared and Jim, yeah, whichever order you want to call.
Can I just say, the taxi industry at the moment is self-sustained. Okay, there's no investment in the taxi industry. Recently, there's been investment for wheelchair-accessible vehicles to allow passengers who need a specific taxi get a specific taxi. But up till then and still till now, taxi drivers pay and run their own business. It doesn't cost anybody a penny. We're talking now about creating services that will subsidise people, subsidise their travel. Why don't we look at subsidising the taxi driver? Give the taxi driver the money and let's continue on with the business that we're doing at the moment, because it's a very good professional business. In regards to technology and Uber, all that type of thing, taxi drivers use technology every day of the week. We've credit card machines, drivers use apps. We do all of that, and there's no problem doing all of that. What we don't want is people who are not licensed doing what we do. We want the same job, the same standards for everybody. It's as simple as that.
George, sorry.
In relation to the fall off of business, in relation to the taxi industry, that isn't true. There's 669 new wheelchairs on the road last year that availed of the subsidy of the wheelchair grant. So there's an increase in the industry through the initiatives of the NTA and the Taxi Advisory Committee putting stuff forward. In relation to the decline of the taxi industry within rural areas, has gone back as far as the smoking ban, which stopped people going to the pubs in the first place, and there has been a general decline since then. And now that the new drink driving laws have come in, there's a new emphasis on people to and from the pub. As I previously said in the opening statement, that there is an agreement with Rural Link and the NTA to subsidise drivers in relation to people isolated in rural areas. The current system that is there of the rural hackney, you don't need to change anything, only make it a little simpler for it in relation to you have to go, you have to be, you have too many steps to go through. And these people are availed of working within the area, and if necessary, dropping somebody off further on out and going and picking them up within that area. There's no need whatsoever to invent a new hackney or a new transport system when a system is already there. And in relation to the smaller vehicle, it's far more accessible for people with disabilities and what have you, or frail people getting in and out of cars than high-sided vans. So everything in relation to what will provide a service within that area should be looked at. Not only wheelchair accessible vehicles, which cost a lot more money and are more expensive to run within the area. But the NTA have already agreed that all of this is being looked into. Anyway, at the last taxi advisory, I have the minutes from the meeting that states that they are all in agreement. But there's no point in going and looking at legislating for something completely new when there's something there that can be modified slightly to bring this into existence. And in relation to the subsidy, the Rural Link is getting a subsidy for driving through an area, stopping in an area for so many hours, and then bringing people back. So there is absolutely nothing that would stop a taxi from providing the same service, whether it's late at night, going to the pub and providing a service to and fro from a pub for that subsidy, which is already provided there. So I don't think it takes an awful lot of tweaking in relation to it. I come from a rural area myself, and I can't get an app or a reception, never mind. And it's going to be the same for vulnerable people in these areas of rural isolation. You're not going to get Wi-Fi. And in relation to a statement that was made there in, let's share, let's everybody share. We've gone through that in the taxi industry at Christmas time. And I guarantee you, my colleague there can testify, we were referees more than we were taxi drivers. When it got to the end of the journey, who was paying the fare? There was more punch-ups, and it was, in relation to that, it was quashed because of our safety in relation to it. It's fine sailing through...
And a clarification. Just a clarification. Uber Share works. No money is exchanged. It works on that. So, but I appreciate you try.
Senator, sorry, Frank, I want to try and keep this right.
Right,
come back in after Jared has spoken.
I can answer. Uber Share. You go into an isolated area, right? How am I going to get paid? Because I have no app on my phone working. So, if I don't get cash in a rural area, I'm not going to get paid by an app. It's all right in the middle of London, where everything works fine, and in Dublin. But you haven't. This hasn't been looked into in a rural. We're talking about rural aspects of services where you can't even get 1G, never mind 3Gs. Where you,
I think that's an important point, but I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
Rural Uber is at the moment legislated as a dispatch operator and is working fine as a taxi dispatch operator, and so is other operators. But I don't think this is part of the rural services is going to work at all. The rural hackney and the taxi and hackneys within that area are the only way to go. And I can't see any reason why it should be extended or any need to be extended further out than that, when there's already an agreement by Rural Link Services. And the only thing that I would suggest in relation to the Rural Link Services, every taxi driver, hackney driver, is correlated into the National Transport Authority. There's a safety aspect which is not advertised enough, the driver check app, but each taxi driver that needs to be provided with a services in these areas, and one that's needed in the area, each one of them can be contacted through the National Transport Authority. If they need to put a tender out, they can put a tender out to 26,000.
To the existing rural link.
Yeah. So if the National Transport Authority has an issue in a rural area down in West Cork, right? They send it. They say, well, there's a subsidy here in West Cork. Send it out to all the taxi drivers, and get a taxi driver to come back in relation to offering services within the area. There is no problem getting in touch with us all, because we all have to be connected in relation to operating viably and within legislation. Anyway, so it's a very simple solution, and that would be my opinion on it, Joe.
Sorry, yes, sorry. I have to take in two members shortly. Sorry, yeah.
Our last speaker said that I misquoted a decline in the number of operators. I have the National Transport Authority statistics here, and the number of active driver licences in 2012 was 34,678, and the number of active driver licences at the end of December 2018 was down to 26,405.
I'd like to clarify that again. That's drivers' licences. That isn't cars.
Well, I was referring to drivers as I did with the age. I referred to drivers.
We know there's a problem.
I'd like to clarify that the service is provided by the vehicle itself, not the drivers that's licensed. Okay. There's a massive decline in drivers' licences because it went from €2 to €250 to renew your licence. So people who had it lying in a drawer says, listen here, I'm not using it at the moment, so I'm getting rid of that. Right. So that's a misnomer that's being used by the National Transport Authority to say there's a decline in drivers, but it's not in the service provided.
I think trying to keep it on an even keel. I think that we're getting a lot of good information from people here. Now, I have a number of members, member of the committee, Deputy O'Keefe. I have Deputy Danny Headway and Deputy Eamon O'Keefe have come in since, and we have other members who are waiting answers. So I'm in your hands, really. But do you want to respond before I bring in new people? Is there any other questions you want to respond to there?
Well, just 1 point. Or 1 or 2 points on what Mr. Mackin said there. First of all, he favours the retention of local area hackneys. Now, after 5 years, there are only 13 of those nationally. So that system, that approach hasn't worked at all. So that needs to be replaced. Now, what we're proposing wouldn't require new legislation. It would require new regulation by the National Transport Authority, and they are empowered to bring in new regulations to deal with it. I think the very important point has been made about the lack of Wi-Fi and even mobile phone connections in rural areas. I think, again, to be practical, it will require the sharing of the vehicle in a rural area if we're going to provide any kind of reasonable service.
I think the point is your service kicks in when there is no taxi service or hackney service. In other words, it's where there is nothing at the moment.
Yes, but
that's what you're really talking about.
You see, what we're proposing is it's surrounds the village, into the village and back.
But it wouldn't be competing with an existing taxi. It's where there is no service at all.
That's right.
That's your point. Yeah. And within 15...
to look at the population, the size of the area, and make sure there's no displacement.
Yeah, so where the gaps are, that's what your service would only and solely operate.
That's the legislation that's actually incorporated into the rural hackney at the moment.
Right.
And the reason why the rural hackney needs to be re-looked at is because we all know it's not working. And partially why it's not working was at the end of my summary there of so many illegal operators operating within areas that they're providing a service in their own cars. They don't have the insurance to do it.
They're not legally covered. Yeah.
In relation to that, in cooperation with the Gardaí and the National Transport Authority's enforcement team, which act on it when notified, it's a very hard one to stamp out. Now,
if somebody's injured in an accident, there's no insurance.
The insurance isn't there for a higher reward, and that's.
There are two parts to the taxi industry. There is the well-managed taxi industry, which a lot of us own taxi companies. It's our full-time profession. We manage it very well. We do a lot of contracts, government contracts, HSC, corporate contracts, all the hotels. So imagine modern Ireland going forward without a proper taxi service. And people wonder, what do? We deliver packages. I'm a Cork man and working in Cork City. Those who live at the South Mall, the amount of work we do for work up and down there. All the hotels, the new hotels opening in Cork. So that's very well managed. Then you have the rural side, which we're talking about today, and it doesn't appear to be as well managed. So if you go down the app route, there's no management whatsoever. So you're at home and you're saying, well, I might go to work for an hour, I might not go to work for an hour. I log on to see, well, is there any bit of work there? Whereas a managed company doesn't have that problem. You're rostering people, you're organising, you know your bookings coming up, you know what flights are coming in, you're picking up the people. And I think to make that licence that we're talking about for rural, make it a valuable licence, make it a licence that people want. Don't flood the place with it, because if you're flooding, the driver's not making money. The driver needs to make money. To get him off, the lady said a while ago about leaving the fireplace on the wet night when Coronation Street is on. But he has a schedule. Acute, smart operator will develop a schedule. And Mrs Murphy down the end of the road knows that every Tuesday between 7 and half past, Johnny will, so she makes a call down and she'll visit her sick sister a couple of miles over the road. She'll go to the community centre for a game of cards and the lab, we will mention, there's a pint involved, we try not to start with that. Sure. But that's what you need. So if there's a schedule, it'll work. But the driver needs to be rewarded.
Right. Deputy O'Keefe.
One question.
Of course, yeah. I'm just conscious we have other people here as well. But
yeah, no, it's only just a response. Just, I'm not sure, Mr. O'Reilly. Maybe, my apologies if you did answer, but I'd asked you about will it be one licence per village or town that would be issued? And just you had said there on the maximum distance each way, say 15 kilometres. And my colleague, Senator Conway, there had asked if. But if, say, for example, if someone is just living outside the boundary and they want to go into the town to socialise or whatever, just from what you're saying, because in one of your responses there you said the areas could be extended. So it sounds fairly messy, as if, you know, you're proposing a set area and then you're saying, well, it can be extended.
It will be extended, I think, where there isn't a service. In other words, between Balmullet and whatever that other place is, that there isn't a taxi service to us.
The 15 kilometres is only an example. So it could be, it'd be up to probably the NTA to designate the area within which this service would operate.
Taxi, that's your whole point.
I would envisage that a driver would have to keep a logbook. Okay? Yeah. A driver will have to keep a log of all the customers it picks up, where, and his requests, and also a log of what he was unable to and maybe had to refuse. And I think this licence should be up for renewal every year. Keep him keen, right? So if you're coming in front of us and you want your licence renewal, we want to see your logbook, we will maybe have complaints from the public, and we will value. And then maybe it's time to award a second licence for the same area. Maybe the demand is there for it. But again, manage it, but the driver at all times needs to make a living if he doesn't.
The existing rural Hackney licence at the moment will allow to operate if you are called outside an area, but you're designated to the area. So if Ms Munster wants to be collected anywhere else, you can drive there and you collect them, but you have to go back to your existing area. That's under the current legislation. So your problem is actually solved by the existing rural Hackney licence, and it's to extend on to that makes it more viable for
Deputy.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, we all know why we're here, because it's just over 2 years ago when our good friend Mr Ross started out his legislative programme in the Department of Transport, and many of us here, Chair, even here as we speak at the moment, were aware of the damage Mr Ross was going to impose on rural Ireland and even the bigger periphery of the urban towns. And we've evidenced that, Chair, at Christmas. Since Christmas, rural Ireland is in lockdown, Chair. Fact, and we haven't even come into the delinquent period yet. So you can imagine after next week what the pubs in rural Ireland will be like. There'll be no one out at all in the villages and the towns. Chair, I welcome Theodore here today, and I would hope that our representative of all the taxi bodies nationally, and I would ask him to clarify, to make sure that when he speaks, that it be the lads from Kerry or Donegal or Cork North, whatever, that every taxi body here is represented, because look, no one wants to see taxi business undermined from other areas when the business and livelihoods are at stake. But there is an issue here, and I'm glad that they do acknowledge there is a problem in regards rural transport access for people in rural communities to their villages or to their nearest town. And I accept the proposals in principle. I welcome them. It's a pity it didn't come out before now, because we did, as a committee, and some of us inside the Oireachtas, some of my colleagues inside the Oireachtas, did try and impress on Minister Ross that we needed alternative proposals. It's even ironic today that the NTA, through Ms Anne Graham, have acknowledged that they're prepared to make subsidies available to individual vehicle drivers, be it a minibus nature or a car or single seater or whatever, wheelchair access vehicles, and that. It's, you know, why did it take over 2 years that the Department of Transport could have been talking in conjunction with the Transport Ireland? Just a few questions in your proposals. Like, you know, I'm well aware, and I have taxi drivers up my door, up my area, and concerned about the cost they have at the moment, even, like, you know. And your proposals, for example, you know, will limit the access to 15 kilometres, and I have no problem with that. Like, you know, that's more or less the average distance from any local or town with a public building. But the question I would ask, you know, the eligibility at the moment, even taxi drivers, even taxi drivers are to be given. Why do our drivers have to know the maps of Ireland? When you're living in Mitchelstown or Glenmont, why should they know about the access to Bundoran or the Inishowen Peninsula? Something has to be done about that. That's one of the reasons why we're restricting access to our applicants on the vehicles. Came across another case lately. A man trying to do a decent business in Knockcock, as many vehicles as possible, you know, but having as many vehicles means a phenomenal capital overrun because of the purchase of the vehicles. His vehicles seem to pass the NCT, no problem, or the appropriate DOE test, like, you know. He goes to the NTA then for the suitability test, and for a few scratches in the car, he could be put off the road as to not suitable. So how are we going to make vehicles available, like, you know, in rural Ireland if the NTA and all these have these obstructions in the way? So I would ask that in your submission that you kind of cover that, because obviously you will have to deliberate with the NTA. Another thing is, you mentioned there, in fairness, like, you know, yourselves, taxi operators, like, you know, prefer to do the intensive area where the short runs are quick book as opposed to taking a person a long run, because it obviously takes the vehicle out of circulation a long time. And I would ask, would you be prepared to allow this service to work on a 24-hour basis as such? You know, that didn't just restrict it to the afternoon, to the closing time, that you do have a situation in nightclubs. And because of the inability of taxi operators to get rid of the people off the streets, it can lead to antisocial behaviour. That's one of the reasons you have antisocial behaviour in some places outside of some nightclubs, because they cannot get the people, I would say teenagers, can be adults as well, out of the way as quick as possible. And that could this service be incorporated there, like, you know, to facilitate nightclubs, be it in Yarl, not Milton, but Mallow, whatever, like, you know, but it does cause some antisocial behaviour. Do you have a build-up of young people outside of nightclubs waiting for transport home? There's only so many taxis. But would your proposal also cover this as well? And finally, like, you know, I have to welcome it, like, you know, I hope that the horse hasn't bolted with these proposals. We have the NTA coming in afterwards, like, you know, and I'll be asking why they take a year and a half to wake up to the issue, like, you know, and Minister Ross still hasn't waken up to the issue, that there is a problem, that there is mental health issues arising behind doors out the countryside. We don't know how people are, you don't see people as much as you would one time, because they just come down to the local, have a few words, get home safely. I welcome the proposal, Chair, but I am concerned that maybe there might be too much restrictions put in place, and to deliver it might take too long.
We have two members we have a member of the committee who's just come in, and we have two members of the Oireachtas who want to speak as well. And there's no restriction here at all. Just to let you know, that we have to be out of here by 1:15, and we have the NTA as well. So, but I appreciate it's a very important discussion. So, Deputy Healway, followed by Deputy O'Keefe. Unless, Senator, if you wish, you have a right of audience for anybody.
Just briefly.
You weren't until now, so I'm very sad.
No, I'll literally be a second.
I want to point that out to you.
Yeah, but I'm sorry for being late, and I was watching it on the monitors. I had to be at a meeting, but I do share the concerns of Deputy O'Keefe about.
So I'll make the point. You're very welcome here. You're a member of the committee. We started at 9:30. Go ahead.
Yeah, and but I do share the concerns, and I've read the submissions about the rollout. That's my concern, and like the restrictions that will be prohibitive. But and thank you for sharing your information. It's vital that we get this right. Thank you, Chair.
Chairman, it's clear that this exercised this committee meeting, and the antics that are being proposed here today are to counteract the bad publicity and the bad reaction that's in rural Ireland following the introduction of Ross's bill, which was supported by most people in the Oireachtas. And it's no wonder now that there's outrage and uproar around rural Ireland, and to see there's a local elections on, there's European elections on, and candidates are getting it in the neck. And that's why ministers of the government and different members of the government are proposing something to try to deflect from the real issues and the real problems that people in rural Ireland are facing since the introduction of Ross's bill. And you see, whether it's the young fella that can't drive on his own with a provisional, on a provisional licence, or whether it is the checkpoints the following morning that have been initiated since the introduction of Ross's bill across all county boundaries, across all Garda divisions, and you see any type of service that's put in place or tried to be put in place won't deal with the issues that people are facing the following morning when they can't go to work. So the social fabric of rural Ireland has been blown to smithereens by one swipe, and I don't know if it can be reversed, but it should be reversed, and that's the only way that will bring.
I just want to draw your attention to the fact that this legislation you're addressing has already been passed by the Oireachtas. And obviously, rightly, everybody is entitled to express. If I could ask you, please, the agenda today is to ask questions of our witnesses, particularly in relation to rural transport. And that's the only issue we've been debating up to now, and I think that's the only issue I'm going to allow to be debated here, because the other issues have been dealt with, and there are other fora which your fine melodious voice can be heard loud and clear. But I'd like you to address this issue, if you would, please.
There is much melody in rural Ireland at the present time, but you see, what's been proposed here is absolutely ridiculous, because you're proposing some kind of other additional tax type of hackney service, and you see, it's supposed to, there's some ridiculous idea that there'll be boundaries. And that these new vehicles can only operate within a certain boundary. Who's going to be policing these boundaries? That's one of the questions. And I'll ask a few questions. Who's going to be policing these boundaries? And if someone that wants to go to the doctor or wants to go somewhere else altogether, so all they have to do is go into a pub and go to the toilet and maybe get a glass of water from the poor publican, can they call on this service to pick him up and take him as part of this as part of this magnificent service? And you see, what I want to ask, Chairman, because I have a hackney licence, and my father before me had it for 60 years. And you see, there's awful strict conditions in this, and we're told that we can only have a car that's 9 years old. So I'm being advised that there's cars 15 years old being used or tried to use them in this. And you see, who are going to affect? Only the poor fella that's regulated and has to jump through so many hoops. And if he doesn't, I know that the PSV inspector will nail him, full stop, and he can't carry on. But at the same time, ministers are suggesting this ridiculous idea to take the pressure off them, because they're going around to the doors at the present time, and they only got to know about it since Christmas.
In fairness, Deputy...
Yes, but you see...
Hold on a second.
Someone answer me the question...
Deputy, please, I just want to make the point to you that it's a proposal that these gentlemen have very kindly put before us. We're debating. It's nothing to do with anything else.
But I can say to you, Chairman, without fear or favour, they're brought in here by the ministers and by this government to cover their backsides, and that's what's going on. And it's a charade
think,
and it's trying to take the focus off of the harm that they're doing.
I think,
And they have rural Ireland paranoid and driven down into the ground.
Look, I'm reluctant. I'm reluctant.
All right, but I have a number of questions asked there about the car that's 14 years old. How is that allowed? Who's regulating the country now? Where is Ross?
Okay, right, look, I am very happy to hear you here. I'm very happy to listen to you, but I think what you're wrong in saying that these people are brought in here by anybody other than the members of this committee. And they're here.
But the chairman of the committee was a new brother, Andrew, a Fine deputy from Louth, and I respect you.
I respect you too. But what I'm trying to get across is that I didn't invite any of these people personally. The committee invited them here, and members of all parties, and none are happy to have them here. And their proposal is their proposal. And notwithstanding what you're saying, I think it's important that they will reply to you and the questions that you have. But it's not a political attack. They're not here representing anybody other than themselves, and they're here.
Chairman, can I just ask one other question, Chairman? If you want to get a Hackney licence and carry at the present time, you'll have to provide a wheelchair accessible taxi.
Of course, yeah.
To get on to get a Hackney or a taxi licence.
No problem.
How can this carry on?
Well, let's get to. I think it's unfair to call it carry on. I think. Hold on.
Just intervene on that.
No, please. Gerard, hold on.
You can get the rural hack.
Sorry, I just want to get this right. Deputy Healy-Rae, you're a good Kerryman, I know that, and your accent is very clear and your point is very straightforward. I think if we can get the answer to the questions, if we can, in a relaxed sort of a way, because this is not a confrontation, it's a communication. So if Miles would like to respond.
I don't know if the Deputy has any other questions apart from what is said.
I think if he asks the ones he has, we'll see where we get anyway.
The first point, I suppose, is that what we're proposing would be regulated, as well as hackneys and taxis, and the village transport would also be regulated by the NTA. Secondly, the question of the WAV requirement. That is a requirement of the Department of Transport and a requirement of this committee in a recent report on disabilities, that all vehicles, all public transport vehicles should be wheelchair accessible. That's why we made that proposal there, to comply with the present policy. We agree completely with you about some of the questions, and in fact with Deputy O'Keefe, about some of the questions that are asked for those wishing to become drivers. To become a Hackney driver or a taxi driver, the tests that you have to undergo are require far too much study and so on, and are completely unnecessary. So it should become, what we're proposing with the village transport, it would be a very easy test that would only require 2 or 3 days preparation and to know the local area and know the regulations related to that service only. So on the question of cars of 14 years old, well, it would seem not unreasonable that the cars should comply with the same rules as taxis and others and be 9 years old of a maximum. Those are the points.
Your criteria are no different to any other taxi or Hackney driver whatsoever.
Yes.
And the key point again of your case is that there is no service in the areas you're talking about whatsoever.
That's right.
So it's in the absence of any service, Deputy. I just need to bring Deputy O'Keefe as well.
Can I just finish?
Sorry, there's a very clear difference. I want to just clarify something.
Sure.
There's a very clear requirement is to lower the standard of the entry level. This cannot be allowed. Why should they lower the standard to allow anybody come into the business? That's what's requested. That's what the gentleman said, is that, the entry-level exam should be changed. The taxi drivers throughout Ireland should be commended.
As well. One question.
Okay.
Wouldn't it make a way more sense to give the extra work to the existing hackneys that are
There isn't
struggling.
any there, you see, that's the whole point. It's where there's no... It's all... I think the point that they're making, and it's purely for us to consider, and obviously to debate, is that where there is no service at all, that they're talking about it. They're talking about it just in case you missed the point. I'll hear you in a second, Deputy. The population will be under 1,000, and the distance you were proposing wouldn't be greater than 15 kilometres, but because of other questions, you recognise that there would be longer journeys in some counties. But you're not competing with anybody. There is no service at the moment. People can't get out. Isn't that the point you're making?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So, in relation to that, that is the proposal from the DORA. That's not the proposal from the Taxi Alliance.
No, we know that, Jack.
So
I accept that.
I'm
trying to clarify everybody's point.
And in relation to Mr. Healy, just before you came in, I read out my proposal.
Yep.
And I have already met with the Rural Link services, plus the National Transport Authority, and they're in favour of doing exactly what you asked, is providing a subsidy for the existing drivers to be allocated within these areas to provide the service and to drive out the extra mileage where it is needed. Where at the moment there is a rural hackney that is there that the legislation is pertained around, right? The criteria was far more difficult than was deemed necessary. These lads are of the local knowledge. The test for them is not as extreme as the rest. So this service is already in existence but hasn't worked. But what has been proposed is tweaks made to this existing service in totally isolated areas that this service could be provided.
To do anything else, Chairman, will blow these fellas out of existence altogether.
Hold on a second. Thank you for your comments. Look, come here. I'm trying to get everybody to express their views. We're not making any judgment. We're very happy to hear the different views. Sorry, Deputy O'Keefe.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you all, and my apologies for being late coming to this committee. I've been working on this issue for some considerable time and given it thought. Now, the first thing on the issue of standards, if it's safe for one, it's safe for the other. If it's unsafe for one, it's unsafe for the other. Let's get that laid down, right, as a basic rule. Now, the second thing is Uber is a different issue. Uber is much more of an urban phenomenon than a rural phenomenon. And anybody who's operating illegally is operating illegally, and it's up to the enforcement authorities to deal with that. And I certainly have never made a case for any service that doesn't comply with standards. Now, I have to say, I think the characterisation of the issue isn't the rural Ireland I live in, and I live in what some of you would consider a very rural area. We don't think it's isolated. And the issue isn't quite as simple as you're making it out to be. What the issue is this, that there are plenty of taxis or hackney licences all over rural Ireland, including in these so-called isolated areas. But like any good fishermen, they go fishing in the pools with plenty of fish. So what they tend to do is drive, as I know personally, taxi drivers and hackney drivers will drive 30 miles to Galway City or to Castlebar or whatever, and they'll fish from that pool. Why wouldn't they? Rather than hanging around local. So one of the first things you get out of your head, that looking at where the taxi licences homes are, reflects an availability of licence there, or licensed vehicle there. It's not the same thing. Because I notice, you see, there's one thing I think we have to get in our head here, that I remember one night we were at a meeting in the city, and it was at the side of the city. Now, Galway's not a big city. And the city people were complaining, and we were nearly falling off the chairs laughing, that it was too far out of town. It was on the edge of the town, and it was an awful way to travel. Now, I had travelled 35 miles to get there and 35 miles to get home, but we would think that 10 miles was next door. So I think we need to look at where we're at. Now, the second thing is, I don't know whether you check the mental condition of the people that get in your cars about loneliness and whatever. Sorry, I live in rural Ireland. I am not lonely, I guarantee you. Neither are my neighbours that lonely. They're not any more lonely than the people in the cities. But we need public vehicle services. Now, I own a car. There's 2 cars in my home. There's only 2 of us in it. We have to have 2 cars. But if we want to go out for a night and have a meal and have something to drink, very modestly, there's no way home. So this idea that this is about, you know, exclusively older people, whatever, in fact, the big market here is just ordinary people doing cities. Because urban living and rural living, they're not any different. And I think we need to get away from what I would call bland characterisations. Now, if I'm here in Dublin, and you know, I'm familiar with the city, I grew up here, I'm from here, and I want to get from A to B, I have 3 choices. I take the trains, I take the buses, or I get a hackney or a taxi. No bus, we get that, there's no bus in our area at all. No train.
Sorry, just a point of information, somebody's phone is on and it's
Maybe it's
interfering with the...
And so let's now talk about the only other way left to get round. And the problem is, there's no guarantee that there'll be a public service vehicle available next Saturday night in my area. If I wanted to use a hackney to go 5 or 10 miles, and I might be to the next village, I might go to the one beyond that. I think I should have that choice. I'd have it in Dublin. Now, basically, what I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on. So we've buried the Uber one, we've buried the Standards one. Now, my view was that Local Link would identify the areas that can't be sure to have a service at given times. And that would vary from time to time as the market would up or down. Number 2, that they could offer a contract to people who are qualified to do it, to provide a service on a contract basis, i.e. the person would have to be available within the hours in the area, and if they weren't going to be available through illness or whatever, ring in and get somebody else who they'd call up. So there would be a system whereby that if we said on a Friday night, there would be 2 hackneys in area A available from 7 at night to 2 in the morning. And they'd have to be available in the area within a certain radius. They would determine. It might be the same depending on the area. Belmullet's very different from where I live and so on. So there's no 2 areas the same. And that in return they would get a payment, a fixed payment. In other words, it could be an equivalent of paying the insurance or whatever. So anybody applies, hackney, lice, taxi, it's not my baby. And it's like getting a contract for a private company or whatever, only in this case, it ties you down at the fixed times. But the rest of the time that you were not on contract, you could go to anywhere with your licence because you've got a licence. Now, the rural hackney licence is a card. It's 11 of them in the country, so that one I think we can rub off the thing. But basically, what people in rural Ireland want, and some of rural Ireland is quite populated, but still doesn't have any guaranteed service in it. They want to be known that when they do, as you would here in Dublin, you pick up the phone and you look for your hackney at the times that that thing is meant to be there. That within 10 or 15 minutes you're going to have somebody at your door. And that's all we're looking for. It's so simple. It's so mind-boggling simple. And to make sure that happens, the market does it in the urban areas. To make sure that happens, we need a contract that actually makes sure it's the person's there. And to get the contract, you need to give them a little bit of dash. Now, let's look at the figures. 60 million to Dublin Bus. 50 million, I think it is, to Bus Éireann, about 10 million. But Bus Éireann and the other. So the subsidy towards urban transport, I mean, you might be getting in the taxi business, but the rest are. The buses are. Huh? Yeah, but the buses are. Big time. There is a huge weighting of public transport subsidies towards the urban areas, amazingly. Because 3 million gets about the same amount as 1 million in around Dublin. So, as I said, what I'm proposing is very, very simple and doesn't upset any of your question rules. Now, the other thing can I ask a question? These figures that were provided about vehicles, WAT, are they?
Wheelchair accessible.
Wheelchair accessible. Now, I think it's important to note the figures that in 2017 there were 15,000 ordinary taxis and 1,471, but 10 to 1. Now, I would propose that, yes, of course, there should be some wheelchair, but not every vehicle in rural Ireland will be wheelchair accessible any more than every vehicle in the city here is wheelchair accessible. If I walk down here to the taxi rank, some are, some aren't. So that would be up to...
Deputy, it's a
Sorry,
requirement.
new ones, but yes, but it'll be a long, long time.
I gather it's the NTA's policy to have all the taxi fleet wheelchair accessible vehicles.
You must have them.
Existing saloon cars can continue to be saloon cars, but
Until that happens, right? But because I'm talking about using existing people, my view is that the service contractor would make sure there are enough wheelchair accessible people in the short term to deal with the issue. Any more that's what they're doing with taxis at the moment, because as I said, it's 10 to 1. That's not available.
Just if it's helpful that I'm looking at the rural link transport, that over 200,000 of their trips last year were taken by people who had. I just want to make the point. Sorry, who needed assistance. That's the broadest terms of words. So you're talking about a lot of people, and I think there can be no exclusion. I'm not suggesting you're suggesting that in any proposal that disability must be a sine qua non, must be met.
But what I'm saying,
absolutely.
In fairness to the NTA now, or in fairness to anyone going for a new wheelchair grant, there's €7,000 available for them.
But what I'm saying is, if I'm contracting out tomorrow, and existing taxi drivers stroke hackneys can apply, 9 out of 10 ain't wheelchair, and I'm saying it'll be up to me as the contracting authority to make sure I had enough of them in the area, in the short term, but not to exclude the other big pool of people who are there already at the moment. That's all I'm saying. And that will give you the exact same balance as you have in the city areas, right? In the urban areas. Now, when the rest of the country will get to 100%, so would the rural areas in my plan. It'll be the exact same, except in this case, the contracting authority would have to make sure that every area had the service of the wheelchair that was more than adequate. Now, in relation to the point made by you, I think, Chairman, I think it's fair to say that in most cases of what Rural Link do at the moment, it's focused at a certain cohort in my community. It's not focused for the people who want to go out at dinner or a meal or to the pub at night. It's focused toward...
There are quite a number of weekend services. If you looked them up, I looked them all up.
Well, okay.
For instance, County.
Focused on volume. And filling a bus. There's
also weekend services, there are night services. The problem they're saying in the report, and we'll be dealing with that next, is that they don't run late enough at night. I think they cease around 11 o'clock. They need to run.
But they're bus services.
Just make the point. There's 160, take the County Kerry, there's 160 different rural link services there. So, like, it's, you know, so it needs, they're coming in.
But they're
shortly.
not on-call services.
No, but the NTA are coming in shortly. Yeah. And I just, like, I'm very interested in what you're saying. And if you want to circulate it to us, we can discuss, like, I have no problem with our witnesses answering your points. But it's new debate for us today on this issue. So if you want to put it in writing to us, we make sure you can come in and address the committee on it, because we intend to have hearings on this to get it right.
Just to get it absolutely clear, of course wheelchair accessibility is important.
But there is.
But what we're talking about here, and what's missing, is not new bus services, but new on-call services.
Right.
Taxi tactics.
Right. So we're a prime example there yourself. Two people sitting at home wanting to get into the Rural Link is not going to come and collect you.
No.
Because it's not a viable service.
Actually do.
And all
not two people.
No, but they do. They actually do.
Well, okay,
door-to-door collection. This is.
Well, I've had a meeting with the lady out of Rural Link, and she told me that it isn't viable.
Well, it's in the document here.
Paper never refused.
I just want to make it absolutely clear. What we're trying to create, what I believe we have to create, because I live there, I live the realities, is the kind of service that we have in cities, in urban areas, i.e. when you need the service, you get it. So the bus idea, let's take the bus one for a minute. You got the bus idea. So everyone has to go to the pub at 7 and everyone has to leave the pub at 11, because that's what the bus wants you to do. Now what happens if you have a couple and they want to go out for a night themselves and they want an early sitting because they're paying a babysitter and they don't want to be hanging around all night, so they want to have a meal at 7 and leave at 10. Somebody else wants a late sitting in a restaurant and they want to come at 8:30 or 9 o'clock and stay till 12 or whatever. Now, in the city, what you do is when you're within a quarter of an hour of leaving, you ring up the taxi and you get it. What we need is that kind of reality, that you have the on-call service. And all the point I was making is this: to make it viable in the short term, it would be up to the contracting authority to make sure that wheelchair accessible was in adequate supply to supply all reasonable needs. But in the meantime, we have to recognise the fact that if you're going to use or allow existing hackneys and tackneys into the game, it would be very inhibiting to have 100% cover of every vehicle in rural Ireland and only have about 10% cover in urban Ireland. That's not the point I made.
Okay, so I just
so all I want to do is replicate.
Sure, okay, can I just explain? I'll be happy for a witness to reply to that, and then I have the National Transport Authority waiting there since 9:30. So I propose if you can reply, I won't curtail your reply, but you know what I'm saying to you. So we get them in and we listen to what they have, and this won't be the end. Like, we're going to bring other people in and to get community groups, voluntary groups. You know, so we get a handle on all of the issues, if that's okay. So, sorry, Miles, yeah.
Well, Deputy O'Keefe, he has outlined an approach to solving the problem, and he's quite right that if you started off, most of the vehicles are not wheelchair accessible, and of course you would start off with, on the basis of his approach, with using the existing vehicles, and I see nothing wrong with that. What we have proposed is an additional service, additional to the local link service, and that would be very much based in the village, would be adaptable. The driver would have every incentive to work whatever hours it took to get people home and get them in and out of the village, and it would be very flexible. It would be rather than somebody in Dublin figuring out schedules or routes or anything like that. It would be done by the local driver, maybe in consultation with the publican or others, to come up with a plan to serve the local area. I think if Deputy O'Keefe had an opportunity perhaps to read our proposal, it certainly wouldn't be exclusive based on helping out older people. It would certainly service people who want to go out for a night to a restaurant or to a pub. And we see Local Link as connecting to the service in the village, picking people up from the village to go to other villages, or even for hospital appointments or that. But the service we're proposing is one that would simply operate to and from the surrounding area into the village and out of the village. Insofar as there would be new vehicles involved, under the existing rules of the National Transport Authority, they would have to be wheelchair accessible. There's a whole issue about wheelchair accessible vehicles. We have asked for a full review of that requirement with a study by the ESRI, and there's an argument that would say there should be specialised wheelchair accessible services rather than require all vehicles to be wheelchair accessible. But the rules as of now are that all new public transport vehicles have to be wheelchair accessible, and that's why we put that in our proposals.
I think the whole point about that, and just to emphasise it, is the rights of people with disabilities are sacrosanct, and it must always be met. Yeah, and we can. I suggested, but we did a report on this, and we published it last week. We addressed it in the door. That a person with a disability has an absolute right to ensure and insist that the taxi or the PSV that comes to them can carry them and meet their needs. And I know you're not suggesting otherwise, but I think that's a core part of our democratic transport system, that everybody gets that service.
We accept that.
Sorry.
Deputy O'Keefe is right.
you know, the people in rural Ireland want the same access to transport services, particularly taxi drivers, that they haven't got at the moment. And the one thing that keeps taxi drivers away from these rural areas is price, the money. Sure, if you don't make a day's pay, you can't go and work for nothing. And if there's subsidies going to be given out, the first ones that should go to are taxi drivers. We're restricted at the moment to charging a metered fare. We can't charge any more than what's on the meter. And maybe if Deputy O'Keefe wanted to go out for a meet, he might want to pay €10 than would be maybe dearer than the normal taxi fare, shall we say, and we think that would be worth his while. But the taxi driver can't charge that at the moment.
They can go home to Cornamona in peace.
An extra €10, you know, wherever. You know, it's all about money. That's what it's about.
I don't mind paying the equivalent I pay.
Okay.
The argument
I would want you to pay.
No,
I think that the subsidies that's going to the other services should be redirected to us.
My point being that we have to get our share of the national vehicle subsidy. That's it, no more, no less.
In relation to the required licences that's out there, wheelchair licence isn't the only licence. You have the hackney, you have the taxi, you have the limousine.
Yes, yeah.
You have what's thrown in now is the rural link, and you have the rural hackney. Yeah. Right? The rural hackney does not have to be a wheelchair accessible vehicle. It has to meet the standards set out by the National Transport Authority in the vehicle, but there's different criteria to
there's a very strong view, and we've expressed it as a committee, that all new vehicles should be and must be wheelchair accessible if they're public transport vehicles. But look, I'm going to adjourn the item now. I'm suspending till 12 o'clock, and we'll have the National Transport Authority in, but we'll be happy to talk to you afterwards if there's any issues. So the meeting is now adjourned, suspended for 10 minutes. Thank you. And the second session of today's meeting will consider Local Link, the Rural Transport Programme. In this regard, I would very much like to welcome the following witnesses: Anne Graham, CEO of the National Transport Authority; Hugh Cregan, Deputy CEO of National Transport Authority; and Margaret Malone, Rural Transport Manager, National Transport Authority. You're very welcome. I just have to read the privilege. Before we commence, I am obliged to read the following. By virtue of Section 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are giving to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charge against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charge against either a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I apologise to our witnesses. Our meeting this morning was very useful. We've done a little bit longer than we expected. But I invite Ms Anne Graham, CEO of NTA, to make her opening presentation, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the invitation to attend. I understand that committee wishes me to address the topic of rural taxis. To assist me in dealing with your subsequent questions, I'm joined by Hugh Cregan, Deputy CEO, and Mark Malone, Rural Transport Manager with the authority. Before dealing with the specific area of focus, I would like to give you an overview of developments in the Local Link Rural Transport Programme. The objective of the Rural Transport Programme is to provide a good quality, nationwide, community-based public transport system in rural Ireland which responds to local needs. Key features of the Rural Transport Programme include completing 2 million passenger journeys in 2018, with 1 million of those journeys provided for free travel passengers. Over 400 private operators provide the services using the services of almost 900 drivers. The programme funds the provision of once-off trips for individuals and community voluntary groups to help address the lack of transport as a factor in social exclusion. Local Link services are a mixture of regular rural bus services and demand-responsive door-to-door services operating in very remote rural areas. These services are broken down as follows: 63 rural regular services and 1,350 demand-responsive services operating nationally. 80% of all rural transport services are accessible, broken down as follows: The regular services, 85% of fleet in use is accessible. This is a combination of low-floor entry vehicles and vehicles with wheelchair lifts. The demand responsive services, 65% of the fleet in use is accessible, comprised mainly of vehicles with wheelchair lifts. The NTA has improved the information on the LocalLink website, www.locallink.ie, which has seen traffic to the website more than tripling in 2018. Over the past 3 years, the authority has supported the expansion of rural transport services to include regular commutable services, operating at least 5 times per day over a 5, 6, 7 day per week schedule. These services are specifically designed to ensure connectivity with other public transport services. This connectivity facilitates passengers to make onward journeys, typically to access education, employment, health, recreational and other opportunities. Recent initiatives in rural transport. The authority recently produced its strategic plan for rural transport 2018 to 2022, which sets out 9 key objectives for delivery upon over the lifetime of the plan. The key priorities of the programme continue to include addressing rural social exclusion and the integration of rural transport services with other public transport services. The authority is currently implementing one of the listed actions in the strategy under Objective Area 8, encouraging innovation in rural transport service provision. That is the provision of evening and night services to address unmet transport needs in rural areas. Following a funding call in February 2018, a total of 65 new evening nighttime services were subsequently approved for funding, and the majority commenced operating in July 2018. Key characteristics of these new services include that 23 of these services are extensions to existing regular public transport services, 42 of these services are demand responsive services, and services will be provided nationally across 26 counties. The services run on average from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m, typically on a Friday and Saturday evenings. The initial 6-month pilot was extended for a further 3 months, as was felt that they needed sufficient time to be established and for the community to trust that the service was reliable. Whilst take-up levels were slow initially across all the new services, patronage began to increase in the lead up to Christmas and in many cases has been retained in the last few months. A small number of non-performing services were withdrawn at the end of December 2018. The initial review of the services at the end of December is published on the LocalLink website. It was felt that most of the services end too early in the evening and extension of time should be considered should these services continue. Coordination of services. In exercising its functions, the authority seeks to achieve the provision of an integrated public transport system of services and networks for all users. Wherever appropriate, we seek to integrate and coordinate services to provide for seamless travel options where change of bus and/or mode is required. This includes the operation of rural transport services LocalLink, which can facilitate connecting to mainline inter-urban services irrespective of the provider of those services. In fact, the NTA is the only body that can bring modes and operators together in an integrated service pattern that provides the best service for rural communities. Rural taxis. However, the NTA recognised that public bus transport cannot meet the demands for travel for many people in rural Ireland, either because it is not available at all or it is not available at the time needed. Taxis and hackneys play an important role in meeting the travel demand when public transport is not available. However, it is recognised that there are gaps in the provision of taxis and hackneys in many rural communities. The Taxi Regulation Review report, published by the Government in January 2012, recommended the introduction of a local area hackney licence to address transport deficits that would not otherwise be addressed in certain rural areas. Regulations permitting the issue of such licences were introduced with effect from December 2013 to enable a part-time hackney service to be provided in generally rural areas which are likely to be too small to support a full-time taxi or hackney operation and which are too far from adjacent centres to be serviced by taxis or hackneys from those adjacent centres. However, there is a very low take-up of local area hackneys due primarily to the cost of insurance. To carry passengers, the standard insurance has to be changed to allow carriage of passengers for hire or reward. This can increase the cost of insurance up to €8,000 per year, making it uneconomic to provide such a service. Accordingly, it is clear that the current local area hackney model needs to change in order to address this significant cost barrier to the provision of needed services. In response to this, the NTA proposed the following: to simplify the administration involved in the local area hackney application process and to pilot a small number of Hackney services that will receive grant aid in areas that have no Hackney or taxi service operating currently, and to pilot a small number of community transport services that will receive grant aid in areas that have no Hackney or taxi service operating currently. No new legislation is required. The current Taxi Regulation Act 2013 would not require to be amended. The pilots will enable the NTA to test this operational model before making it available countrywide, and would also allow us to better estimate the cost of delivering this type of grant aid. It also has to be carefully managed so that it doesn't undermine existing licensed taxi and Hackney operators in rural areas. I believe that the work that the NTA is doing in expanding rural public transport services and this new proposal to expand local area Hackney and community transport services will go a long way in meeting the travel demand in isolated rural communities. That concludes my introductory presentation, and I trust that we can answer any queries that arise.
Sure. Does any other member of your wish to make any comments? Okay, before I open to the floor, I just want to say that I very much welcome the work that you're doing nationally, and what I see as significant successes and identifying the weaknesses which are there at the moment. And the concern I have is that of your 1.9 million passengers last year, almost 1 million of those were people who were on free travel. In other words, would have been older people, or there would have been people who had an entitlement to free travel. So therefore, that would indicate either advanced in years or disabilities. And your disability figures, or people who require assistance, is 0.2 million, which is 200,000 people you carry. So it seems that you're meeting a huge need there, and I want to acknowledge that. I think it's hugely important that people who wouldn't otherwise have the capacity, to generate their own way of transport, that you're doing that. And I also welcome the gaps that you have identified, and in principle you're looking for a private sector solution and a community solution. Now, the community solution, one of the community solutions that has been mentioned to me is one, I think, Loudmead, Fingal, where they're talking about what they call a local service, where the person is registered, is cleared with the Gardaí, they provide their own vehicle, they're not actually paid, but they're known to the people in the area, so you know who the person is, and that you then ring them and you get your transport organised. And I think if there is a payment, it's not an income, it's in lieu of. I think that's one of the issues that we'll be getting them in to discuss. And I think the problem that arises from our witnesses earlier this morning is that the cost of insurance, even for a driver with 30 years accident-free driving, could be 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 euros. So I presume that the subsidy you're talking about, or the grant aid as you call it, would that be at that level of commitment where there is no service at all? In other words, you would meet the majority. Could you expand on what would you actually do? Would you pay the insurance basically where there is no service, or what views do you have on that?
That's the idea, is to cover that set-up cost, which is really the insurance, and to cover it, probably paying it on a monthly basis,
right.
Subject to certain kind of conditions, obviously, in terms of what the provider would have to do. But
Right.
it's really recognising that insurance is the barrier to having many of these services operating, whether they're being operated on a community basis or operated through the local area Hackney system.
Right.
So yes, that's the purpose of the grant aid.
And the number of areas that you've identified numerically or geographically, I presume, have you a publication on that?
We're proposing to try and pilot them one in each local link area. So
that's
one per local
17
link.
areas?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's actually in every, it's not in every county, but it's in every local link area.
Yeah.
So you'd have both a public and a private, community and a private initiative.
That's what we're trying to
I think that sounds really, sounds really useful. And the last, I'll open up to the other person, but the point then is the transparency of what actually happens. So you're covering my car insurance, and I'm not around when I'm supposed to be around. Or what sort of, I think, what requirements would be on me in terms of the day. Obviously, if there is a local link services, when there isn't one, it's really when there isn't one, isn't that right? When it's out of hours, or it's late at night, or it's...
the requirement will be that you have to keep a record of all your bookings and all your trips. That would be the requirement on both the community type service and on the local area Hackney service. So we would have to be convinced that you are operating in that area, in lieu of the grant aid. Would that be anything you want to add?
Yeah, we obviously, before we pay the grant, we want to make sure the service is provided. So as Anne said, we would be looking for a record of the bookings that people took, and basically we'd want to see that they are genuinely providing the service in that area. Otherwise, it makes no sense to pay the grant. But if they are providing a service, then the grant gets paid to them.
And you would actually monitor that then, obviously regularly, weekly or monthly, I presume.
We're envisaging a monthly payment, and the monthly payment is on the basis of getting the evidence that they have provided the service for the previous month. And we won't be making it very onerous, because that goes against the idea of trying to do it. But there has to be a balance between some evidence that provided the service and the payment they get for it.
Right, so that's very helpful. I know Deputy Troy there just is a member of the committee standing at the moment to ask the first question. Just what they've explained there, just a summary, if I've got it right, where there is a gap, where there is no existing service, they're proposing a public and a community and a private initiative where they would effectively pay the insurance cost on a monthly basis to the community or the private service provider, provided to meet certain requirements, and they would do it in all 17 local link areas at the moment.
One pilot per local link
And
office.
that would be starting, what, very soon?
Well, there's obviously a process that we have to go through to
Sure.
establish it, and it will take a number of months to get up and running.
But it will start before the summer, hopefully.
We'll see whether we can achieve that.
Of course you can. Okay, so I'll ask Deputy Troy first, and then Deputy Collins was here before Deputy O'Keefe, so we can actually fight it out there.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and apologies to our guests that I was caught somewhere else. But I think it's very welcome that the representatives of the NTA are here today. I was acknowledged that you're coming today with proposed solutions, which is not always the case when people appear before committees with solutions. So that has to be acknowledged. I think what's critical here is in terms of the time frame for implementation, and indeed whether it's going to be backed up with adequate resources. There was a reaction last August, September to changes in the drink driving legislation, which led to the establishment of the nighttime local link services, and that they were to be established on a 6-monthly basis. Pilot originally, and that pilot has been extended by 3 months. Have we any update in terms of an analysis in terms of how those services worked? Certainly anecdotally, speaking with colleagues, and indeed speaking with some of the transport coordinating units themselves, in some areas they've worked well, and in other areas there has been a very, very poor demand on the service. I hope that this proposal that's now emanating isn't going to replace those services, because those services weren't simply about bringing people out socially, but they contributed to maybe people working in towns late at night and could have a lift back to their villages. They actually provide links to other transport services from the town out to the rural service. So they're not just about bringing people to and from the pub, and the local link. I think we need to acknowledge that they have worked in certain areas in relation to that. But critical, I suppose, to what's being proposed here this evening, or just before I go away from that local link service, I understand that all the transportation coordination units has been put out to tender, that they are still awaiting clarity in terms of whether they have won the tender. I understand that their current contract that they're operating under expires on the 31st of March this year, so the new tender or the new operations should be in by the 1st of April, and we're almost the 1st of March now, and people are unaware whether they've been successful. So in terms of the continuation of the local link service, are you confident that the tenders will be awarded and that the service, there'll be no disruption in the service, because if some people lose it, to have to establish a new service before the 1st of April will be very onerous, I would imagine. In relation to the proposals that you've here today, it's quite clear that when there's only 13 Hackney licences in operation nationally, it's not fit for purpose, it's not working. You're talking about simplifying the administration application process. How exactly, can you specify exactly how you're going to simplify the process? Can you confirm the time frame as when the pilot will be up and running? And can you confirm how much resources has been allocated to that? How much resources has been allocated to the pilot system? And finally, we've heard a number of contributions this morning from taxi representatives who are still in the visitors' gallery now. And one of the big things is, I suppose, is the average age of taxis, the recruitment of taxis. Are you confident that this is not going to prove to be a challenge, that you will actually be able to get somebody to provide and run this pilot service?
Okay, thank you. Just can I bring in Deputy Munster, if that's okay, and we'll get the answers to the questions then we take in our other... Thanks.
Just in relation to, it's obvious that some parts of rural areas do not have the rural transport programme service whatsoever. So I'm just wondering, can you provide us with the information as to what areas have a functioning rural transport programme and what don't? I know I had sent in a question about it some time back, and they'd said they weren't able to collate that information, but I'm quite sure that was an error. I'm sure that you, as the governing body, would have all of that information and be able to furnish us with it. If you don't have it with you today, would you agree to furnish us with that? Another one was that in the strategic plan, of course, you mentioned increasing services, but yet you've reduced the number of local link offices from 35 to 17. And I'm just wondering, how could that be a good idea, given that you said the services should be locally managed, and that it would be a demand responsive service? How would that be a good idea? Because there's many areas that don't have any public transport at all. The other one too was the strategic plan. The strategic plan had always said it was about demand responsive services, but it seems to me that since yourselves have taken over, it's more. It looks like it's moving more towards scheduled services. So that would conflict with the demand responsive services, and I'm just worried that the rural transport programme is actually plugging gaps that should be filled by bus airline services. So I'm wondering, can you give us figures as to how many new bus airline services that have been launched in the past year, and whether or not they were new routes or increased frequency on existing routes? If you could. The other one then was, there was something here about the key findings of your first review found some services ended too early in the evening, obviously, so that they were kind of you deemed some of them as non-performing services. But I'm just wondering, given that that was just your first review, have you extended those services to see if they, if there was an uptake, or the amount of people using them increased, or did you just put them down as non-performing services and leave it at that? The other thing that I want to raise too is I had asked for some figures in a parliamentary question last November, would you believe, and wait for it, I got the response from yourselves yesterday, November, December, January, February, 4 months. You couldn't make it up. Now, the figures were quite shocking, I have to say. The figures, I had requested that the additional funding allocated in budget 2019 for each of the CIE companies and Go Ahead. Now, it transpires that current expenditure is actually down 2019 at a time when rural transport is on its knees. Your current expenditure has reduced. Your capital expenditure took a massive whopping. 2018, 9.2, it's actually down to 2.9. That's very serious. I mean, at a time when we should be focusing on increasing our public transport services, turns out that budgets are being reduced. I mean, Bus Éireann is the main provider, you know, as we all know. So to reduce the funding for that is, I don't know, I can't even find any logic as to how you could possibly explain that. The other response then was I had asked for funding allocated to Go Ahead that were awarded contracts to operate the subsidised bus services. And you had said that for reasons of commercial sensitivity. But their only competition is Bus Éireann, and it's public money. I mean, there's serious questions to ask about that. That is the taxpayers' money that you're subsidising. A private company, their only competitor is our national bus service, Bus Éireann. We know what goes into them. In fact, we know you're reducing their budget, but you won't tell us what you're giving to subsidise Go Ahead. That's very serious stuff. It's unbelievable, actually.
Issues arising there. First of all, I think in fairness to you, you've asked very important questions. The meeting at the moment, what I'm trying to concentrate on is the rural link issues and questions in relation to that. And if it's okay with you,
I'm sure they have no problem answering those questions.
No, but I want to try and keep it in a structure that they won't have any problem answering. I know they won't.
I've just asked four, so it's not too many.
Sorry, I want to try and deal with this rural transport issue first, and then we'll go back to the second part of your question.
I wouldn't say that I've major problem answering the four together. It's only four here.
No, but I want to try. There's a load of other people.
But it's all actually linked.
Yeah.
It's linked.
Sorry,
it is actually linked.
I'm the chair, right?
I know you're the chair, but you're not trying to block me from asking questions, are you?
I want you to listen to me now,
I know they might be sensitive for you being a member of the government party, but the questions...
No, not at all.
Sorry, I'm asking in the public interest.
If you wouldn't
mind... I'm asking in the public interest. Now, if you want to try and stifle an elected member asking questions...
Absolutely not.
If the NTA have a problem answering the question, that's up to them to say it. You can do it. That's not the first time you've done it. It's not the first time you've done it.
I'm now moving into private session, okay? Session, and we're dealing with all the questions initially germane to in relation to the agenda for today, and then we'll answer all of the questions. So I take Deputy O'Keefe, who's a member of the committee, next. He's actually a member, so he is Vice Chair. And then, in the order in which you come into the room, Deputy Collins, Deputy O'Keefe, Deputy Headway, and Senator Humphreys. Is that okay? Okay, so we just get all the questions to the NTA. then we'll get the answers on that, and then we'll deal with all the other questions that arise.
Chair, I suppose I don't want to repeat myself, and I want to be weary of questions being asked already, but just one comment. First of all, I do welcome the NTA coming here today, and more importantly, acknowledging that there is a crisis out in rural Ireland in regards access for people living in rural areas. And I suppose the only question I will ask Mr. Graham is how come they didn't see the alarm bells ringing now? Like, you know, because when we were going through this legislation about of amendments to the Road Traffic Act, these issues were highlighted by many of my colleagues, and we got no reaction from the authorities. And now when the house is bolted and the damage is done, we seem to be seeking a resolution and some initiatives put in place, which I do welcome. But I have to ask the question, you know, why is it I know the alarm bells are ringing the NTA officers, like, you know, because obviously they did try and it's during near completion now, in the March, the pilot scheme of the rural transport bus link at night time, and it was I take up in a few areas, like, and many areas approached me about being considered for it. But as you know, like, buses run on a time frame, and rural Ireland, like, you know, it's an ad hoc base, like, you know, and access, you know, not everyone lives on the main artery roads or the regional roads, like people live up by roads up the side hills and that, like, you know, and that's why I would welcome any proposal that would enable being a Hackney. There was a suggestion of Uber as well in the last few weeks from one of our ministers, but anything that would help to get people from A to B at, I suppose, one of the better on social hours would be a help. And I would ask one other question, like, you know, we have the issue in the morning after, like, and could this service be utilised in the morning as well, like, you know, for people who have shop journeys to work but are in fear of driving? Could this service be availed of in the morning as well, like, you know, for those who might want to get to work to the nearest town or whatever, like, you know?
Where the service commences, that's the point you made, or you wanted earlier if
I wanted it, you know, obviously the focus with lad is
get people to work, yeah.
Get people working in the morning as well, like, you know, that might have a fear, because at this stage no one knows what the limit is, like, you know. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now Deputy Collins, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to the National Transport Authority for their submissions here, or presentations, I should say, to us earlier. And, you know, looking at the presentation and speaking there about the local link service, it is second to none. Daytime service is absolutely meticulous, in fairness, and it's a model that should be looked at in rolling out anything in relation to transport service going forward. Because I know, and it isn't just the West Cork or the Cork County local link, it's local link throughout the country. You talk to different individuals, talk to people. You see, the board usually are geographically spread, so they do have an understanding as to what is needed, what is required in each area, and they do, thankfully, make sure that everybody is cared for. And there's very, very few, I think, throughout the country would have any issues with local link and a daytime service. Obviously, the only worries we have is the contracts being awarded at the moment, and that decision, like Deputy Troy said, is very, very important and is awaited by these groups so that they can continue this good rollout of work they do. I think I don't have a whole pile of faith in new service. No, maybe if I'm proven wrong, I accept it, and I'd be quite happy to do so. I said earlier here today that obviously the horse is bolted, and we should have been sitting here 2 years ago, before Ross introduced the road traffic bill. That would have been very helpful. We would have at least been able to try and counteract the huge damage that's done to rural Ireland. In my own area, there's several pubs closed and businesses closed in the last few months. That's thanks to this bill, and unfortunately they will close. And you did say this could take months before it gets off the ground. You see, why I don't really see it working is you have a whole lot of regulations, from what I can gather today, going to be attached to this service rolled out. Okay, you're going to give them some grant aid going forward. You're talking about a 7-8-seater vehicle. You're talking about it has to be wheelchair accessible. Obviously, they have to be guarded with it. There has to be insurance. A huge issue for any operator that's trying to do a business. You're saying you're going to pay the operator monthly payments. So first he has to buy the vehicle, then he has to insure the vehicle. So now, in my view, he has spent a lot of money. But I'm just trying to tease it out slightly.
It's helpful. I think the NTA are saying they will pay the insurance on a monthly basis, isn't that it? That's what they're saying.
We need to tease all this out.
That's the main point.
So, like, it's very hard to see a person getting a vehicle for 10 grand and insurance for 6, 7, 8,000. You're talking close to 20,000 before he turns the ignition in the key, and then he's going to have to roll out a service for €5 maybe per person in a rural community. Maybe have one run in the night, maybe have 3 some other nights. You know, and the whole point I'm trying to make is you have a system in place already, okay? And there is problems with it. And there's no point in me saying and I saying that there isn't. And the system where the problems are, I think the best way forward is sit down with your local link managers, sit down with the head of taxis and the head of hackneys, and try and come up with a solution. And they certainly will, because they've worked. We'll say the local link people have worked, and managers have worked side by side with the taxi and hackney operators and never displaced them, have worked with them going forward successfully. And my feeling is that now we're going to throw another service into the fray that is not going to be as regular. Are they going to have their vehicles tested the same as the hackney and taxi? Presumably you're carrying people, it is. You know, there's a whole lot of questions that need to be addressed. We're not looking at the bigger issue here, and the bigger issue is many taxi and hackney operators tell me they'd be quite happy to have their car running by night, but they can't get employees. Why can't they get employees? Because people that want to get the licence are going, we'd say they're down in Skibbereen. So what's one of the questions they'd be asked? Where's the Garda station in Mitchelstown? What in the name of God? That's irrelevant. Like, it's totally madness to be bringing up a question like that, because the sat-nav will take him to Mitchelstown, but most likely if he's down in Skibbereen, he won't be going to Mitchelstown to the Garda station very often in his career, maybe once every 20, 25 years. But he may fail because of them kind of questions. So, and also then you have situations where they're trying to keep their vehicles on the road, and they feel that the powers that be are against them doing that. There obviously has to be serious regulation, because these vehicles are carrying people for reward or whatever. But these people that are there seemingly are coming at them as if they want to make sure they're going to find a problem, instead of working with them to make sure that there's solutions that they can go forward. So they're all giving out, should the hackney and the taxi men are charging too much. They're being regulated out of it. They've been overcharged. So maybe all this grant aid, if he had sat around the table, and maybe he can do that going forward with local link in Witchy, see how can he create a solution? Because local voluntary community groups want to help with a solution, because it is a major, major crisis in every town and village. But they need, I don't know, adding in other services, just complicating matters. It will resolve it. You say 17, no disrespect. You put one into Cork, right, out of them 17 groups. That's like a dot in the ocean. You have to put at least 30, 40 services to at least somehow counteract the crisis that has emanated through Ross's bill. So I'm only just saying, look.
With respect to the gentleman we call Ross, he has a title like you're a deputy, he's a minister, so...
you can call me
No, just please, out of respect.
I know, yeah.
I'm not asking...
What they call it Ross's bill, they call it Ross's
I don't call you Collins, you don't call me.
You can call me if you want to, I don't mind, but
I think, no, you must call a minister by his proper title. And that's it, you know,
He's been called a lot of other names.
I think in fairness, we have to stick to respect for the office that he holds.
I won't. I'll call it the bill that he introduced. I won't call the name. But I finished up. What I'm trying to say is, look, my worries are. I don't want to be negative. You're in here. You've ran local link, and you know the way it's rolled out. Meticulous. It cannot be anything. Can't be taken away from that. You're going down another route now. Okay, but I'm convinced that the local link should be very, very, very much involved in this going forward. The existing taxi and hackney operators who are struggling to survive in rural communities and are willing to work with this going forward should be in around the table, and maybe some of this grant aid should be going towards it.
I just want to say that for clarity, what your proposal is where there is no service at all, isn't that it? So you're not talking about existing issues that are separate from what you're proposing. There is no service, there is no taxi, there is no hackney, there is nothing. So that's what we're talking about.
Well, I just want to
make that point.
Yeah,
Deputy O'Keefe, you can come back in.
Oh.
Deputy O'Keefe, yeah.
NTA here. As they know, I have a whole lot of rural issues. I have some emails sent, and I hope I'll get an answer to them soon. But I'll focus on the issues here today. I'm going to start off with the first point. As I pointed out time and time again, when it comes to road vehicle subsidisation, rural Ireland is totally discriminated against per head of population. The amount of money spent on urban bus services is way, and on public bus services, etc., on road vehicles is way higher in the urban areas per head of population. I don't begrudge. It's very handy when you're up here. You can get buses, you can get trains, you can get all sorts of ways of getting around. So, to level up the playing pitch, and it's up it has to come, I don't think any should be taken away from the cities, we're going to have to spend money. So the first thing I think we get in our head, why should everything in rural Ireland be done for free? Two, I don't go along with the kind of free voluntary community effort here, like anybody else, providing a service that should be able to earn a living out of it. Four, I'd say if you looked at the addresses of Hackney and Hackney owners around the country, you'd be quite surprised how many of them are in rural areas that still have no service. The reason being that they tend to migrate on the busy nights into the cities. Five, this is not just a problem in isolated rural areas with no service. This is a problem of not being sure that on any given night or any given day that you can get the service when you want it. Because at the moment the taxi drivers, Hackney operators and the existing taxi operators are free to go wherever they're going to get the fares. So I have to, the final point therefore, I believe we need a comprehensive solution here of contracted services that make sure that every part of our island has contracted services available by public service vehicle at all reasonable hours. It's not a big ask in an area where the population actually isn't very sparse in any part of it in reality. Now, I have to say, I look at the proposal here and, you know, I look at the county of Galway and I'm getting one service. So thanks.
I think in fairness, Deputy, the proposal is a pilot.
Yeah, so, so I'm coming to that.
In fairness, we must be fair.
Yeah.
The facts are that they're posing two services,
so like all solutions.
two services in each of the 17 areas. I know it's a
two
start.
services.
Yeah, it's a private and a public. It's a community and it's a private service.
Yeah,
so in fairness to the NTA, and
so
you're quite entitled to make whatever points you want, but you can't.
No, sorry, let me
stick
finish.
to the facts.
Chairman, just because I'm hitting hard on the facts.
No, not at all.
What I said is, I do apologise. We're getting a community service. I have my views about this kind of, community service. I'd love to see that one operating up here, and a private one. So that's two. So taking them from Ballinasloe to Ballyconneely, two services. I don't know what world we're living in. Now, what we're told is that it'll probably take, if I know anything with the NTA and the delays that are there, just in terms of delays, we'll be lucky to see it decided of the end of the year.
I think, in fairness, I don't know if you heard them or not, but they're talking about introducing it, I think, hopefully before the summer.
Yeah, and they were to,
in fairness,
they were to introduce state bus services.
In fairness to the witnesses, you have to be fair.
No, I'm being fair, and I'll answer that. I'll answer that. We were to get a late night bus service out from the Carrow route.
I think
September, March, we still haven't got an announcement. So I have fair justification. That's just one scheduling to provide us bus after 6 o'clock in the evening. We haven't got it after all that period of time. So I think it's a fair summation to say, and we can come back here in the autumn. You're right, I do not see this new service up and running before September.
Yeah.
Right? Now, secondly, when we do get it up and running, we'll be told there's 6 months and then there'll be a review. I see the way everything works in this country. So for a year or two now, we're still as worse off as we all are, except for the few lucky dip people, 34 small communities around the country. Now, as I said, this is very pervasive in rural Ireland, that you can't guarantee yourself a public service vehicle when you need it. So this, as I said, it can be as near as 6 and 7 miles, for example, to Galway. There are plenty of hackneys and taxi drivers who live in areas near to Galway, but they all move into the city, so you can't be sure to get the service. So I have to say, I think that this is the usual thing for rural Ireland, suppenite muscuibe. And what that means in English is one straw instead of a brush. And you know how much a sup would do for you, sweeten the floor. So I have to say I'm very disappointed. I think it's totally the usual push-off, and I think it comes back to one issue, an unwillingness to commit fair funds to rural Ireland. Equity is what we're looking for. We're not looking for special treatment, we're looking for equity in expenditure.
Okay, Deputy Danny Healy-Way.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Then Senator Kevin Humphreys, yeah. After you.
What did you say?
That's all. You're first.
All right, thank you very much. You see, first of all, I want to thank the witnesses for coming in here, and we all know the value of local link and the services that have been providing for many years and are still providing, and we appreciate that very much, where they're doing an awful lot for elderly people in rural places. But you see, we're actually talking about a separate issue altogether. We're trying to deal with the issue of what has transpired since the enactment of this very draconian bill that was put in place late last year, and the effect that it has had on rural Ireland. And you see, the government sometime early last year, they promised that they would introduce services for to counteract this, and in Kerry a kind of a pilot scheme was proposed. So there was much ado and a big hullabaloo about 8 services that were being provided in Kerry. One of those 8 services was to take people from Clahan to Brandon once a month. It's just a publicity exercise, I mean, to deal with a massive problem, and that's the people out there. They can't be fooled any longer. And
I'll point information to you. I actually checked the number of services in Kerry, and there's 160 of them.
Hold on, no. Chairman, you mustn't have been listening to me at the start. I recognise that there have been services.
And I know the road from Clahan to Brandon as well.
Yeah, but I want to again recognise that there has been many services, and Local Link have been operating many services prior to 2018. Yeah. Prior to 2018. But at the request of the Minister who was under pressure, and the Junior Minister who was under pressure for transport, and Deputy Hayden and others, they came out with this big story that they were going to provide a pilot scheme. And what we got in Kerry, and no one can dispute that, because the truth will always come out, Chairman, we got 8 services, extra services, and one of them is a once-a-month service. Yeah. No one can deny that here, there, or any other way. Sure. And you see, there's mention, and you see, it's hard to follow everything. There's mention that that insurance is going to be subsidised for some type of people that are going to provide a service. And you see, I don't think that you'll create uproar amongst the hackneys that are already paying massive insurance, and the taxis who are paying massive insurance. So I think if we were to be realistic about it, to those people we should be talking to, and subsidise them that are trying to provide a service, because you're saying that this is going to be for an area where there's no service. But you see, I would argue that in any town and any parish, all over Ireland, there is a hackney service. There is someone has a hackney, and there's maybe many people have hackneys. But it's just not, how to say, lucrative or not financially viable for them to operate in rural Ireland at the present time, because during the week, and maybe this evening, what happens during the weekend, they might go to a busy town where they get a bit of work. So rural Ireland is still left behind.
I think just to be helpful, one of our witnesses this morning spoke about an actual relationship, maybe the NTA can elaborate on it, between the rural link and the private service contractor coming to working together. I think that you actually link up the bus service to the Hackney and taxi service, and it's a paid or subsidised service. At least that's the impression I got this morning on that issue.
So, but can I finish, Chairman?
Sorry, yeah, Deputy. Sorry, Senator Humphreys. Yeah.
What I want to ask is, there's a whole lot of people, there's a lot of talk about night time and about operating service at night time. But in rural Ireland, different to Dublin City, different to many parts of Cork City and other places, we don't have, in the morning, we don't have loose, we don't have DATs, we don't have buses. And you see, there's a whole lot of people now isolated. They can't even talk about pubs, forget about them, they'll be all closed. There's a lot of them closed as it is. But people can't have a social drink at home now tonight in rural Ireland, because if they're going to work the following morning, they're held up at Lyra Town Cross, they're held up at Jib Cross, they're held up at Mackentowrick, they're held up in rural places going to work in the morning, and the living daylights are frightened out of people. But what service are we going to provide for them? Has anyone spoken about providing a service to help people to get to work? Because people will manage sometimes to go to the pub with great difficulty, but talk about the morning after they're doing everything right the night before, they're still being held up at the crossroads, whoever gave this order of the morning checks. But it is happening, it is a fact that people in rural Ireland the living daylights are frightened out of them. They're like rabbits now inside the hole, peeping out, afraid to come out because the fox or the dog might catch them. So that's the way people are in rural Ireland at present now. They're terrorised in their homes now, and they can't have a social drink like they used to have before. And that's the problem. And I know that because I knew it from the very start. I knew before it happened, because I'm out with people, meeting people on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week. But I know that it has only manifested itself with some of the deputies from other parties, including the government, that this is a big issue in rural Ireland. So how are we going to deal with the people that are affected in the morning? Is there any proposal to provide a transport service for them? Have we got any direction to provide a service for them? And you see, it's maybe not part of the discussion here today, but what is going to happen for the provisional drivers that can't get to work, they can't get to college, and their parents can't be with them, and at the same time they're waiting for 20 and 25 weeks for a test? Is there going to be any mention of a transport service for them?
Okay,
because that is a real issue out there.
I think you made your point. I think the one thing I'd just like to say in response is that nothing changed except the penalties. You can't drink and drive, full stop. That's it. And the fact is that the number of people that were killed in Louth and in Kerry 2 years ago was, I think, between 7 or 8 people in each county. And that's the number of lives that are saved by the new legislation coming in.
The new legislation is there since last November. So that's all it was short.
Walking home.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Anne, for coming in, and Hugh and Margaret. Just very briefly, is there a possibility in relation to enlarging the pilot areas? If the scheme is successful, as this is in relation to the Hackneys, how quickly could you scale it up? Is there a possibility in relation to the Hackney drivers that would be getting a subsidy? Is there a mechanism to make it area specific? So if you're given a subsidy, how would you actually manage an area specific Hackney service that would be subsidised? And that's all, Chair. As I said, I'd be brief.
Thank you very much for the questions. I hope you can answer every single one of them. We're doing making good on time. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to share these with my colleagues.
Yeah, of course,
if that's
as you
okay.
wish. Yeah.
So in terms of Deputy Troy, the time frame for implementation, we'd like to get them up and running this summer, as we indicated, if we can. It does require the local link offices now to be, we're obviously going through a tender process that's just being completed. The TCUs will be informed this week of whether they're successful or not. The decision was taken at our board meeting last week related to these tenders, so they should know by the end of this week. And the idea is that we will keep the services. Obviously, there should be no interruption to any services while, if there is any changes to delivery of local link office services. It shouldn't impact on public transport services. So in terms of resources, so there's no additional human resources being put to this. Financial resources, we will ensure that there's enough financial resources to carry out the pilot this year. We don't know what exactly that is going to be, but we'll ensure that we will set aside in our budgets the resources to do the pilot this year, one per county of each type of service. So we will set aside that budget. The analysis of the pilot evening services, that analysis is up on our website. That's analysis we did up until the end of December. Obviously, we'd have to do that work again. I don't know, Margaret, if there's anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, the next analysis will happen in March with a view to having a report again by the end of March to see. Again, anecdotally, we would be hearing the same things as have been expressed here today, that in some cases the evening services are working extremely well, in other cases patronage is low. I suppose being fair to the process, getting any public transport service off the ground and building trust in it and finding passenger confidence in it can take a period of time. So certainly we would be expecting to see an increase on quite a number of those routes even between December and March of this year. So as soon as those results are in, we'll be making them available to everybody as well, and that will dictate where we go with the evening services subject to funding.
You might just talk about simplifying the process.
When the local area hackneys were introduced back in 2013, there was a concern around ensuring that we didn't displace the business of existing taxi and hackney drivers. And in conjunction with the Taxi Advisory Committee, which is a consultative group of the taxi industry, consumer groups and various other parties, we devised a system whereby we required the local authority to endorse the application and confirm that there was really no significant amount of other taxis or hackneys operating in the area. We're required to sign off from a local group, be it a business group or a registered charity. So they're the steps we had in place previously. And we think we should simplify those, and we want to remove most of those burdens and make the process simpler. So basically those two steps, which are currently part of local area hackney, we will be dialing those backwards as far as we're able to, and that's the simplification we're aiming to do in the application side of it.
In terms of what if we don't get any contributions? Well, we can only really test that. It's just, that's why you do a pilot, is to test and see, do you get applications in? And if we'd be very disappointed if we didn't get somebody to run a pilot in each local link office. So that's what we will do in terms of testing. Deputy Munster, about a functioning rural transport taxi service. I'm not sure what that question was about. I think, was it a question about knowing where hackneys and taxis were operating, what areas they were operating in?
Not just hackneys and taxis, just the rural transport provision generally right across the state, because there's clear that some areas are without any public transport in rural areas. So I presume that you would have a list of those areas that are without or have minimal provision.
We wouldn't have that mapped in any way, but obviously we are doing a significant amount of work on a county by county basis in trying to establish where there are gaps in our public transport services, mostly on the day-to-day scheduled transport services we're looking at. Then we rely then on the local link offices to identify gaps beyond that in terms of where public transport is, what are the gaps in their local areas that they want to fill. We as I said, there's no map as such. We'd have to just list you out.
But
all
yeah.
We can list you out every service if that's what you're requesting.
Yes, and the ones that are left without any service. You know,
that's a bit difficult to do because we'd have to identify certain town size, you know, before. So it's a little bit difficult to do.
Well, that's what I was curious as to why you wouldn't have that if we're trying to ensure that we provide.
We haven't done it on a national basis. What we're doing at the moment is doing it on a county by county basis. But we have been focusing on towns of a certain size and above. I'm not sure whether we've done any work on towns of a certain size and below. You know, so but we'll check that out for you.
Can you furnish us with what you have anyway, collated, please? Yeah.
Collated, if we have that kind of work. We've only done, as far as I know, we've 3 counties done at the moment. So.
Right.
Okay. But we're working to extend that nationally this year. It's a difficult piece of work to do, so takes quite a lot of resources, human resources to do. So
yes, but the importance of ensuring that, you know, if you don't have everything, if you can't identify areas that don't have it.
We all have supplementary questions to ask, and none of us have been engaged.
Well, I'll move on to then the local link offices.
Clarity in a question that she asked.
There was a question about reducing the number of local link offices. That was a work that was done more than 4 years ago. It was part of re-looking at delivery of our rural transport services. A decision was taken at that time to reduce the number of offices. We believe that the service in terms of delivery of services locally hasn't been diminished by that. In fact, we think it certainly is improving in many of those areas. So we obviously are very try to support our local link services as much as we can. In terms of how many...
Sorry, just clarity on that, just in relation to the fact that you actually closed down a substantial amount of those offices, if there are supposed to be demand responsive services.
No, we haven't reduced the demand responsive services. Those demand responsive services stayed in place and in fact have increased. We still provide 80% of the public transport services through the programme, the Rural Transport Programme, are demand responsive services. It's still a very significant part of the delivery by the local link offices. So by reducing the number of offices, that didn't reduce the transport services. We only reduced the administrative number of offices that were managing those services. So that didn't have an impact on actual public transport service delivery. In terms of the new, how many new bus errand services launched in rural areas, that's something I'd have to come back to the Deputy about. I haven't got that number.
I think the witness, Graham, is answering the questions that were asked.
Just related to rural. I'm not going to answer the other ones, but so we'll move on to the other ones, which were Deputy O'Keefe. And in terms of the pilot areas to be considered, we just need to let you know, I think you were talking about short journeys to work. We're not going to limit the time of operation of these either rural local hackney services or community transport services. If there's a demand for a service in a particular area in this pilot, we will try and meet it no matter what time of the day it's been requested.
The subsidy will be available 24/7?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Deputy Collins, then, do you want to try and answer those?
Yeah. I just answered one other question Deputy O'Keefe raised, I think, is, you know, how come we only saw the alarm bells now? Yes. In fairness to ourselves, we recognise for a long time the local area hackney service system isn't working, largely down to the insurance, a small bit down to the administration side. And 9 months ago we brought a proposal to our taxi advisory committee that I spoke to you about there, and it's been under discussion since then. So it's not that we're just waking up now. We are conscious that it needed correcting and trying to get broad agreement as to what to propose.
And sorry, through the chair, was the Minister aware of all this? Minister, your line Minister, Minister Ross, Lord Ross?
I can't speak for what the Minister was aware of. We were dealing directly with the Taxi Advisory Committee. We brought a proposal to them and it's been under discussion for a considerable number of months, and we've now got to the stage that we're proposing what we have here. And Deputy Collins, you mentioned a number of things there. And maybe if I just explain how the local area hackney works and is intended to work. It is intended to be regulation light. So you do not require a large 7 or 8 seater vehicle. You do not require a wheelchair accessible vehicle. You do not require to pass the standard driver test that all other taxi and hackney drivers will pass. So it's intended to be filling a gap where it's uncommercial to provide a normal service. It's the key rule around the vehicle is that it's a vehicle under 10 years of age and has got an NCT, and everything else is relatively light around that. In terms of discussing how it should operate with taxis and hackneys, I repeat again, there is a taxi advisory committee set in place under legislation. It does include representatives, and you would have heard from some of them this morning, from the taxi groups and hackney groups across Ireland. And basically, we do tease out with them what is the appropriate measure to put in place. And you're correct that one local area hackney in Cork is a bit of a drop in the ocean for Cork, but it is only a pilot. And the intention is, if that pilot functions properly and we sort out any kinks that arise, and inevitably there will be, that this can be put in place in the other areas that genuinely need the service. And I think there were your key points.
And I think you also asked that the local link office be involved. Obviously, they're going to be crucial to the delivery of this service, and they'd be very much involved, particularly in identifying the areas that we would pilot first. So we wouldn't be in a position to be able to do it unless they were involved. Deputy O'Keefe then said that rural Ireland totally discriminated against. We've had this argument, I think, in this committee before. We obviously don't agree with them in that. We try and provide services, both urban and rural, to the extent that we can with the available budgets that we have. And we try not to discriminate between one area and another. We just try to provide a service that meets the local demands, knowing that there's gaps and knowing that we have there's limits to what we can provide based on our budgets. So we are committed to trying this service out, piloting it, and seeing what, as Hugh said, what are the pitfalls, if any, in relation to this, and then also being able to identify what is the cost of having to deliver this, or trying to deliver this on a nationwide basis, because currently, obviously, we don't have the funding to do it on that level. So I think that was it from Deputy O'Keefe. And Deputy Healy-Rae, again, local link officers are going to be very much involved. We rely on their local knowledge really to assist us with putting this pilot in place. Senator Humphreys, would you respond to Senator Humphreys' questions in large?
Yeah, the areas for local area hackneys are defined, so we do want them to be genuinely for that local area. So in granting the licence, there will be an area of pick-up operation of X number of kilometres agreed and defined as part of that area. In terms of growing the number of pilots, as soon as we get some feedback, and we're not in the business of waiting ages and ages to know how it functions. We know very quickly have we got issues to resolve, but if we don't, we would see ourselves moving, subject to the funding being in place, to rolling this out across the state in a planned way in a very short period.
Okay, just sorry, Deputy Tried, then Deputy Collins. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and welcome some of the clarity that we've received. I suppose I'm concerned in the fact that you don't actually have identified a specific budget for this pilot as yet, only to say that you're going to set aside the necessary resources. So, like, you don't know specifically then in terms of how much grant aid are you going to give the community operator, how much grant aid are you going to pay for the insurance of the particular operators. If you're talking about 34 operators between 17 community and 17 commercial, are you going to pay 34 sets of insurance? Are you going to pay 34 different types of subvention? Based on that, you're looking at a pilot scheme of maybe €400,000 or €500,000. Quick figures based on some of the figures that have been bandied around. Is that resources going to have to come from your 2019 allocation already? So it's going to be diverted from somewhere else. obviously that would be a worry, because to be fair, you're operating quite efficiently on a tight budget already, so that would be one worry. While you have a desire, and I'm not going to question your desire in terms of getting it up and running in a timely fashion, you also have a lot of other projects that you're trying to get off the ground, are involved with Bus Connects, Metro North, many projects. Do you have the capacity? Have you received additional HR resources in the last number of years to implement and roll out all of the schemes that you're trying to do at the moment? And finally, I suppose, and just before the final point, because even from the point of view, and we had this many times, it took 12 months. Eamon O'Keefe gave an example. It took 12 months for approval for an additional bus airing route to be approved in Mullingar previously. From when the initial application was made by Bus Airing to provide an additional route on the 115 service, it took 12 months to go through. So there's a legitimate concern in terms of being able to roll this out in a timely and efficient manner. Concerns that the budget, you haven't quantified the budget per se, and that the budget is going to have to be taken from what's allocated already. And as previous speakers have said, it has the capacity to work. I will acknowledge that it has the capacity to work. There's flexibility in there. But when you look at my own transport coordination unit, it spans Longford and Westmeath, two large counties, to a lot of rural settlements and villages in that county. And what you're saying today is only 2 of those areas will be piloted, and at best, initially, yeah, that's what a pilot is, and at best, if it's up and running by September, if you decide to run a same pilot as you did on the local link nighttime service of 9 months, that'll bring it into the following April or May, and then maybe seek additional resources to roll it out further. There's communities in rural Ireland that's not going to see anything for the best part of 2 years. Being honest, just want to be honest here today, and that would be a big worry. And I think not to rubbish what you're suggesting here today, I think you're making comprehensive suggestions, but the lead-in time in terms of supporting rural Ireland in 20 to 24 months is a lot more damage will be done that's already done.
Okay, sorry. Just Deputy Collins wished to come back to the question there. And sorry, Deputy O'Keefe and then Deputy Munster.
Yeah, just very briefly, because most of the questions that I raised have been raised already. Just maybe because I wasn't listening properly. There's 17 local link companies. In this new service you're talking about, you're saying 1, or is it 2? That's what I just wanted to know. Yeah,
public, it's a community and a private. 1 community
and 1 private.
1 private, yeah.
Okay, that's right. So, my point is 2 in the whole of Cork County is just that's in the ocean. It'll take 2 years, like Deputy Troy is right there. He said it'll be 2 years before we get that chance.
Okay. Sorry, Deputy Munster.
Sorry, Kerry. Tell me it's not an apparition that I haven't just seen Minister Ross in the chamber as we speak on a topical issue. When we have a crisis in rural transport on its knees and he couldn't be bothered attending this committee. He's handing over his responsibility to others. He should be here for scrutiny when he's requested to be here. There he is in the chamber on topical issues. If that's not the 2 fingers to people in rural Ireland, I don't know what is. And you need to raise that as chair of this committee.
Well, you'll be glad to hear, and I know you'll be delighted to hear that I've been talking to the clerk during the break that we did have, and we've been sitting here since 9:30. I've no problem being here as long as it takes. The estimates meeting is fixed for the 6th of March, and I was speaking to the clerk, and I was going to raise it with the committee, that with the consent of the committee, we request that he will deal with this issue on that date.
Yeah, well, that's at least that's something. But I mean, his response was due to the pressure of work, and there he is on a little easy-peasy topical question.
But in fairness, issue of the correspondence, we agreed at your suggestion that correspondence would only be taken in public. And
Yes.
so therefore the first opportunity we had to formally address the issue was today.
But that
So
that
that's
doesn't.
in fairness to you.
That's a totally separate issue
Yeah,
to
no,
him.
it's not.
To him
I
saying
think
he's
I want
under
to move
work
this thing
pressure.
on.
Now, just there was one other question.
Sure,
Just
of course,
that's
yeah.
a totally different issue to say he couldn't attend today because of work pressure, and
Well,
there
he
he
can
is.
answer- he can
lo and
answer for
behold, a
himself.
topical issue.
I can answer for
yeah, but
what
I'm
the
just
work
saying,
we're
as
doing
chair of the
here.
committee,
So you stick
to
to
have him
the-
here.
yeah.
Now, just in relation to. The NTA that just had said in response to one of the deputies that the local link offices are crucial in identifying local areas not covered, and that you couldn't actually identify them without them. That their knowledge is their local area involvement, and you rely on them for their local knowledge. But that's in contradiction to what the response you gave me when I asked you why did you close down more than half of the local link offices.
Will I go back through the
Whatever,
different
yeah,
deputies?
whatever you're comfortable with, yeah, no problem.
Sorry, Deputy Troy just asked about our own capacity. So we have received additional resources, HO resources, have received approval. We're going through a recruitment process, significant recruitment process at the moment, to assist us. Sorry?
How many additional staff?
26 additional staff.
And what will that be? Bring your
Right
complement
across the board. It brings our HR complement, I think it's to 120, something like that, 120,
So you're probably
120,
at
30.
94 now, up to about 120.
Or about that, yeah. So we feel, you know, we have the capacity and will have the capacity to deal with all our range of issues. That's what I am here to do. That's what I try to manage. Obviously, we have additional demands that we're going to be seeking additional HR resources for as we roll out further kind of projects to deliver better services and better infrastructure across Ireland. In terms of we acknowledge that you know, trying to get changes and approving changes for bus air services takes too long. And it's not something that we want to stand over. We prefer and we want to improve the turnaround in terms of once a service is approved, getting it up and running, because 12 months, as you say, is not good enough. And we will be working with Bus Éireann to improve that turnaround, to get them turnaround as quickly as possible, because it's impacting on service delivery for the public. I'm not going to put a figure on the budget. You know, all I would say, you did your quantification there, because we will have to see what the insurance costs are right across, whether they differ across different parts of the country. They probably won't. But it is out of our existing budget that we will be resourcing this. There is no additional allocation. We'll obviously seek additional allocation for this, but obviously there's demands on the government's budget.
Minister in with our estimates, and we're going to talk about rural transport.
Okay.
It'll be a good opportunity. It'll be a good opportunity to put a case to him that you need additional. Is it fair to say you'd like additional funding to roll out this pilot?
We always seek additional funding if it's possible, but we recognise that there can be constraints on that. So we're willing to bring this pilot forward within our existing resources. And then in terms of the local link offices, even with the reduced number, we still believe they have quite a significant amount of local knowledge, and their boards are based right across their region, the different counties that they manage, and we believe they do have the local knowledge that will assist us in identifying where the
yeah, but you
local
did say
need is.
that the local knowledge is crucial in identifying areas that's covered.
Yes.
And then you close down over half of them.
The
point has been made. Yeah,
the question has been answered. Okay, so sorry, Deputy O'Keefe. Yeah, no, there's other. Yeah.
Just a comment, Chair, and I suppose first of all, Chair, like my colleague Deputy Munster, like, you know, just for the record, for the people that are watching, like, you know, Minister Ross only got at least 2 hours notification on the topical issue, like, you know, he's in a thumb up. On the overall topic here today, Chair, I suppose I came in today, Chair, we're hoping for an immediate damage limitation exercise, and And I welcome the proposal, but from what I see now, Chair, we seem to be behind against another government propaganda exercise. We all know the problem, Chair. It's like the housing crisis, but all we are seeing is complicated solutions. And the nails have fast been driven on the coffins of rural Ireland. And the point I make, Chair, we haven't time to be waiting for more pilot schemes. We need to put in place national proposals. National proposals.
Turn the meeting on until 10 a.m. on the 13th of March. There's one issue that concerns me, and I appreciate you'll appreciate me saying it. Is that if there's an issue about any, it should be that any additional new transport that we're funding in terms of insurance, we should also, if necessary, be funding the wheelchair accessibility aspect of it. Because I think anybody, anywhere, who has a disability should have the right to get a wheelchair accessible transport if we're subsidising it in the manner, and I welcome what you're doing. And I would say if there's any issue about funding, we're very happy to, as a committee, to support, the funding through the Minister or whatever. I think that's critical. Equality access is hugely important for us. But thank you very much for coming. And I know you've had...
I could deal with Deputy Munster's questions if you would like.
But she's not here. So not here. So please note Deputy Munster is not here.
My comments, Chair.
Oh, sorry, your comments, Chair. Well, I think they're all read. The meeting is now adjourned until 10 a.m. the 13th of March. Thank you.